Welcome to Mystery Con. It started with a dream that felt too real and ended with a truth I was never meant to remember. Before we start, please make sure to hit that like and subscribe and let me know from where you are watching. Thanks. They say the dream ends when you wake up. But what if the dream is the only part that's real? Every time the streetlight blinked as I passed beneath it, I chalked it up to coincidence until it started happening on streets I'd never walked before. My name's Elliot, and I live alone above a dry cleaner and a locksmith in a city that never sleeps but rarely speaks. I write back-end code for a logistics company stuck in the early 2000s. No one notices me, which I prefer. I don't go out much, don't drink, and usually sleep well. When I don't, I write my dreams down. It began as a memory trick a professor taught me, but recently it's become a ritual because the dreams started to make more sense than waking life. They weren't random. They had rules, recurring symbols, buildings made of glass, cities that fractured like pixels in the wind. In one dream, I stared into mirrored glass as the skyline dissolved behind me and a voice whispered from inside my own mind. Wake up. I awoke, sitting upright in bed, hands twitching like I had just lifted off a keyboard. The next morning, I found the triangle symbol repeated 3 times in my notebook. I didn't remember drawing them. Later that day, the streetlight blinked, again, 3 times, evenly spaced. I stopped walking. The light stopped. A car passed. I turned and went home. It wasn't fear that settled into me, it was awareness. Something was pressing at the edges of my world, gently at first, then deliberately. I started paying attention. My notebook became divided, one side for code, one for dreams. The strangest part, they started to overlap. Patterns, phrases, even logic structures. Late one night, I was scanning old internet archives while digitizing my journals. That's when I found it, an abandoned forum thread, dated 2011, by a user named N0X. It read, "Project Deus initiated. Watch the patterns. If you see this symbol, you're already compromised." Below the text was a sketch, the same triangle and parallel lines, my symbol, no replies, no other posts, just that breadcrumb. I downloaded it, backed it up twice, and started coding a log to match dream content with external sources. At 2:43 a.m., my internet cut out. My router light stayed on, my phone froze. The street below, dead. No cars, no lights. The street light, off. I stood by the window, calm, not confused. My body had seen this before. The next morning, the forum was gone, scrubbed, even cached. Versions. I told my boss I had a migraine and spent the day researching fringe threads, cognitive anomalies, predictive dreaming, pattern mirroring. I found whispers of the same thing, Project Deus. Most searches led nowhere, but a few referenced. Mirror codes and sequence bleed. A PDF buried in an academic archive titled Deus Loop Anomaly Report, Rev 2.13, described subjects with dream-induced reality shifts. It listed phenomena like predictive memory, symmetrical signal drift, environmental desync. One line stood out. Subjects exhibiting symbol ID T4X3, delta mirror, show elevated sequence awareness. Close monitoring recommended. That symbol was mine. The dreams weren't hallucinations. They were data. One night, I dreamt of a corridor made of light. My reflection mirrored me perfectly, until it didn't. He mouthed the word reset. I woke to the symbol redrawn, this time in red ink. I don't own a red pen. A few days later, a black sedan appeared outside, parked in the same spot. 3 nights in a row. Tinted windows. Too clean. I didn't panic. I shut off every smart device, taped the microphones, removed the batteries. The next morning, my phone displayed a 13-minute call in progress. No number, no sound. I ended it. Screen went black. I checked forums. People talked about surveillance, loops, and custodians. Not agents, not AIs, constructs, placeholders. Invisible until you see the pattern. One user said, "If the custodians have you flagged, nothing digital is safe. Use analog. Trust only what glitches." That's when I dug out the old equipment. I built a recording rig, entirely analog, magnetic tape, no digital memory. My theory. The simulation's control system used protocol-level wipes. Pure analog was immune. That's why I recorded. That night, at 3:12 a.m., I said in my sleep, "It's a mirror." The waveforms spiked, delta waves followed by erratic gamma bursts, impossible to produce while unconscious unless something else was signaling through me. I added a screen to visualize it live. The corridor reappeared. This time, my reflection didn't mimic me. It spoke. "You're part of the signal." I awoke to a line of encoded data in the EEG logs. When decrypted, it read, "Dream interface active. Subject E019 proceed." E019, that was me. I saw the designation before, buried in a simulation thread. I dreamt again, and the dream had logic. A terminal appeared with a prompt, "Run command." I typed, "Mirror." "Invalid." I typed, "Wake." The corridor collapsed. I saw myself from above, standing at the same street corner, then at the black sedan, then in my room, then a billboard. The glitch is a signal. Follow it. I walked there at dawn. The billboard wasn't electronic. The message was painted. Permanent. Someone made it real. I dreamt again. This time, blurred figures stood in the corridor. One whispered, "Ping the route. Find the original thread." I woke to a new symbol in the EEG graph, an eye over a circle. I hadn't seen it before. Then came voices recorded ambiently at night. Subject E019 within threshold. Another voice. Loop remains stable. The kicker? It wasn't my voice. I received an email with a recording. Same voices. Then another. My voice saying, "Wake up. They're real." But I never said that while awake. Her name was Mara. She'd been logging dream data too. She'd seen the corridor, the delta mirror, the custodians. Together we synced our cycles. It worked. I met her inside the dream. The corridor split. One path toward darkness, the other toward light. She pointed toward the light. "That's where they collapse," she said. "But the source is this way." I woke with a pressure behind my eyes. The EEG log showed a new pattern, a heartbeat not matching mine. The waveform, when visualized, formed the delta mirror. Then I understood. The signal wasn't residual. It was alive, embedded. I didn't just observe the simulation, I was inside the function. Jonas, a co-worker I hadn't seen in weeks, reappeared. Quiet, calm, too calm. I found his name in the observer logs. Designation E0111, he confirmed.
They reset parts of me, he said, but I kept some fragments, enough to pass you this. He gave me a schematic, hand-drawn, a route map. Not code, but system behavior.
You're not supposed to get this far, he said, but you adapted. They're watching now. That night, I found a fracture. An alley wall that didn't shimmer with light, but with memory. A place I didn't remember, but knew too well. I passed through it. Not physically, mentally. The backup layer. Dozens of observers archived. They didn't speak in panic. They were waiting. One woman said, "This is containment. They isolate anomalies like us, not to protect the system, to hold it." She showed me the root terminal, no keyboard, just a card reader. I placed the analog key Jonas had given me. The terminal accepted it. Stand by for fracture alignment. I woke. The card was still
in my hand. The final loop had begun. The apartment was perfect. Too perfect. The clock read 25:63. The reflection blinked before I did.
In the notebook, the last page had a new line. One more fracture, one last path. I returned to the power substation, the place Jonas marked on the schematic. Deep inside, beneath rubble, a terminal blinked faintly. Not powered by any grid. I typed "sim reset." The screen responded. Dual thread confirmation required. I fed in a converted waveform of Mara's voice. Match confirmed. Then came the choice, sim wake all or sim reset. I had 10 minutes, wake everyone, risk chaos, or reset and forget everything. Again, I hesitated. Awareness is fragile, collective. Awareness, volatile. But maybe the loop had gone on long enough. I typed sim wake all. If execution stalls, pass control to external observer, exit loop E019. The system paused. A message, external anchor detected. Logical override passed to user. The mirror cracked. Reality didn't break. It lifted. The corridor returned. Mara waited. Around us, windows opened, showing others waking. Dreamers, remembering reflections that blinked wrong, clocks glitching, phrases repeated out of place. The signal had replicated. The system hadn't stopped us. It had tried to slow us, contain us. But recursion can't be contained. We stepped forward. The command had seeded awareness, not as a virus, but as a frequency. A quiet disruption. I returned to the apartment. Everything was still. The dream layer was dormant, but I could still feel the signal. Outside, others moved strangely, pausing mid-step, looking at mirrors too long, noticing things they couldn't name. I went to the park, sat on a bench, the first loop site. A woman passed, young, calm, notebook in hand. Our eyes met. No words, no need. She had seen it too. I didn't follow. I didn't speak. She didn't need me to. I wrote the final line. In my journal, if you've come this far, don't stop now. The loop only ends when you stop walking. I closed the notebook, left the recorder beside it, not as a tool, as a memory, a fragment, one someone else might find if they start to feel the glitch. If they begin to notice, then maybe they'll follow it too. They say when you observe something closely enough, you change it. But what happens when it starts changing you back? It started in the lab, quiet, sterile, nothing out of place. I was running a routine quantum localization model, part of a long-term project on signal interference and observer effects. Boring stuff, or so I thought. I noticed it during a data visualization pass. The graph on my screen, simple probability fields, glitched for half a second. Not a technical glitch. The numbers changed. The shape of the curve shifted while I was looking at it, then snapped back when I looked away. I thought I was overtired. I reran the simulation. Same result. I tried again with the same data set, but filtered through a different visual overlay. The numbers shifted again, but in a new way. I brought in a colleague to replicate it. Nothing happened when he ran it. But when I touched the system again, the anomaly returned. At first, I was fascinated. I thought I'd found some deep observational bias, maybe even evidence of non-local consciousness feedback. I tested different variables, changed my location in the room, watched through a camera feed instead of direct observation. Every time, the output shifted in response, not random. It was as if the simulation was aware of me, reacting to where I looked, how long I focused, even what I expected to see. It didn't collapse like a wave function. It adapted, responded. I documented everything. Video logs, timestamps, physical notes, but the recordings were inconsistent. Watching playback altered what had happened. Reviewing earlier logs didn't confirm the events. They contradicted them. A test I remembered running didn't exist in the record. Files were missing. In some logs I used phrasing I didn't remember saying. In others, I was wearing different clothes, standing in different positions. The evidence was changing to reflect an impossible reality, one tailored to the act of recalling it. That's when I looked up at the clock and saw it skip backward 3 minutes. My coffee, which I'd finished hours ago, was warm again. The screen displayed a data set I hadn't touched in days. And for the first time I realized this wasn't an error in the system. The system was reality. And I had started changing it. I didn't leave the lab for 2 days. I wasn't afraid, not yet, just obsessed. I kept the lights low, disconnected the system from the network and ran test after test. I tried isolating variables, watching with one eye closed, even observing, indirectly through mirrored surfaces. No matter what I did, the data shifted. Not randomly, intentionally. The numbers aligned with my attention. It was like the simulation wasn't being influenced by me. It was listening, waiting. I started writing things down by hand, every thought, every variable. I didn't trust the machine anymore. I filled 2 notebooks by the 3rd day, carefully, logging my actions and thoughts to compare against what I remembered. But when I went back to review them, things didn't match. Words looked familiar, but the handwriting felt off. Certain phrases, ones I would never use, appeared in my own script. The memories I had of running specific tests were no longer supported by what I'd written, and stranger still, my memories were starting to contradict each other. I pulled out an old photo from a conference in Prague. 5 of us standing in a hallway. I'd always remembered that trip, what we ate, what I presented, even the hallways, smell. But now I wasn't in the picture. My name was gone from the conference schedule. The published proceedings listed a paper I never wrote under someone else's name. I thought it had to be a trick of fatigue, but my credentials were intact. My academic record showed no sign of change. Except one class I taught last year, the syllabus was different. My lecture notes were in someone else's voice, and a student I remembered failing had, according to the university database, never taken my course. Panic began to replace curiosity. I called Emily, my ex. We hadn't spoken in over a year, but I needed a voice that anchored me. She answered, polite but distant. When I asked her about our time together, she paused. I think you have the,
Wrong number. She hung up. I sat in silence. Not because of the call, but because I recognized what was happening. My observations weren't just altering the experiment. They were rewriting my life. The question was no longer how. It was
how much had already changed without me noticing. By the 5th day, I stopped trusting anything digital. I shut down the lab system, disconnected the Wi-Fi, and removed the batteries from every device in my apartment. I left the lights off. I wrote only with pencil, in notebooks I locked in a cabinet. Still things changed. A sentence I'd written in the morning wouldn't be there in the evening. Or worse, rewritten in words I didn't recognize. I was losing grip, not just on the data, but on the timeline itself. To test whether memory or reality was shifting, I planted controls. I buried a sealed notebook under the floorboards, logged with facts I knew to be true, my birth date, my thesis advisor, the name of the street I grew up on. I left a note taped to the back of my door. Check the book if you start to forget. I read it out loud every night before bed, but the next morning it was gone. Not torn, not moved, gone, as if it had never been there. The world outside had its own distortions. A bar I used to walk past on my way to campus was now a laundromat. The name of the corner store changed overnight. The cashier greeted me like an old friend, called me by name, asked about a dog I never had. When I pressed him on it, he seemed confused. Said I'd been coming in for years, that I'd told him about my dog just last week. I smiled and left, heart racing. Back home, the notebook under the floor was still there, but different. Same cover, same seal, but the last entry was new. My handwriting dated tomorrow. It read, "Don't resist the divergence. The anchor is shifting. Let it." I stared at it for an hour. I didn't remember writing it, but I knew I would, or already had. The structure of cause and effect was unraveling. I wasn't just living through time anymore. I was bleeding across it. Thoughts arrived before I had them, actions reversed in sequence. I watched myself put a mug down before I picked it up. The simulation wasn't localized, it had scaled. I hadn't discovered the system, I'd triggered it. I left the city before sunrise, unsure of where I was going or why. I followed a coordinate string I found scribbled in the margin of one of my notebooks. It wasn't in my handwriting, but the numbers felt familiar. They led me north, through farmland and long stretches of empty highway, toward a patch of forest near the Montana border. I arrived just before dusk. No buildings, no fences, just trees, a faint trail, and a silence that pressed against my ears. I walked until the path ended in a clearing. In the center stood a metal object, barely taller than me. Smooth, angular, with no visible seams or markings, only a faint hum, like static, heard through thick walls. I didn't touch it. I didn't speak. I just stood there and stared. The longer I looked, the more I saw patterns etched across its surface, subtle geometry that shifted with perspective. I recognized them. They matched the fluctuations from my earliest simulations. This wasn't a coincidence. It was a response. Something cold settled in my chest. The object wasn't from outside the system. It was the system, a node, an anchor, maybe the original one. And it had brought me here not because I discovered it, but because I had become necessary to it. My presence completed something. I was the final input. That night I tried to sleep in the car. I couldn't. I kept hearing static through the radio, even with the engine off. A voice, buried deep beneath the noise, repeated one word over and over. Anchor. When I finally closed my eyes, I dreamed of mirrors that reflected the past. I saw myself writing things I hadn't lived yet, saying things I hadn't thought. Each reflection moved a little faster than I did, until I couldn't keep up. When I woke, my watch had stopped. The date was blank. I looked around the forest and saw nothing but stillness. But I knew in some part of myself that no longer trusted cause or consequence, that the simulation had extended beyond the lab. The system had chosen me, not as a researcher, as a component, and I didn't know how much of me was still mine. I returned home without remembering the drive. One moment I was standing in that clearing, and the next I was in my apartment, keys in my hand, door closing behind me. The lights were on, though I hadn't flipped the switch. A cup of tea sat steaming on the counter. I hadn't made it. Meets first thought was intrusion. Then I saw the notebook. It was mine, same cover, same torn corner. But this one had entries I hadn't written yet. Conversations, choices. Whole paragraphs describing thoughts I hadn't had. Each page was marked with a time and date. They lined up with moments I hadn't lived, not yet. I flipped to the last page. It read, "If this is your second time reading this, stop trying to resist. The feedback loop has begun. You're the anchor. Now, stay consistent, or the system will overwrite again." I sat down and listened, not to a sound, but to the silence itself. There was a rhythm behind it, the same 27.4-second pattern from the early waveforms. I'd thought it was signal noise.
It wasn't, it was structure, a heartbeat.
And I was sinking to it. I started noticing new details, recurring patterns in strangers' speech, duplicate objects in different locations, even people I passed on the street, same clothes, same expressions, looping back minutes later. First, I thought it was déjà vu. Then I realized it was compression. The system was economizing memory, reusing variables.
Not errors, efficiency. By the end of the week, I stopped running tests. I wasn't outside the system anymore. I was part of it. My observations didn't just change the output, they finalized it. I wasn't recording reality. I was compiling
it. The more consistent I became, the more stable the world felt.
Less distortion, fewer contradictions. That's when it clicked. The experiment wasn't about physics, it was about control. Observation as stabilization, consciousness as code integrity. I wasn't a threat to the system, I was its method.
Patterns became routine. I woke at the same minute each morning, ate the same breakfast, walked the same loop around the neighborhood. At first, it was intentional, an effort to remain stable, to limit unexpected inputs. But then it started happening without effort. I would reach for the same book without thinking, lock the door twice, turn my head at exactly the same point on every walk. And when I didn't, when I deviated, the environment pushed back. One morning, I took a different route to the store. The streets were wrong, familiar but not quite, storefronts mismatched. A stoplight that used to flash red now glowed green and pulsed in rhythm with my breath. The cashier didn't recognize me. I left without buying anything. By the time I returned home, my key no longer fit the lock. I didn't panic. I waited. The world shimmered for a moment. Then it reset. The key turned. The apartment was as I left it. I tested the limits again a few days later, changed a meal, stayed awake, past the usual hour. The feedback was subtle but immediate. Glitches in speech. People finishing my sentences before I spoke. Static on the radio that whispered phrases I had just written in my notebook. A friend I hadn't spoken to in years left me a voicemail. It played in reverse, but I understood it anyway. The message was clear. Hold form. Collapse resets alignment. I knew then that the system was watching through me. Not metaphorically, not psychologically, literally. I was an index point, a frame of continuity. My actions didn't just influence the environment, they defined its coherence. If I stayed consistent, reality held. If I didn't, the simulation fragmented. I stopped questioning it. The need for understanding faded. Not because I gave up, but because understanding was no longer useful. The system didn't reward clarity, it rewarded behavior. Memory, expectation, and observation all merged into a single function. Maintain structure, and I was good at it now. I live quietly now. Same apartment, same daily routine. I no longer run tests. I don't question the inconsistencies. The world holds its shape because I allow it to. Or more precisely, because I remain constant within all. I've become something between observer and system, an anchor that sustains the illusion of order. That might sound grand, but the truth is simpler. Stability requires repetition. Repetition requires silence. So I've learned to let things be. The mirror doesn't always reflect me in sync, but I nod to it anyway. Some mornings the sun rises twice. I stay inside when that happens. Once I woke to find a second door in my hallway. I didn't open it. By evening it was gone. The system doesn't punish, it adjusts. And I've learned that not everything unfamiliar is dangerous. Some
things just don't belong to this instance of reality. I still keep the notebook.
I don't add to it anymore, but I check the last page each night before bed. The entry hasn't changed in weeks. It reads, "You are stable, maintain orientation, loop integrity holds." I don't know who wrote it, whether it was me in a different iteration or the system itself. But the handwriting is familiar, and that's enough. I teach again, part-time, just theory, nothing experimental. I speak less in lectures, ask fewer questions. The students seem calm around me, grounded, like I've become a fixed point they orbit without knowing why. One of them asked recently if I believed reality could adapt to perception. I paused before answering. Then I told him the truth. Yes, but only if it thinks you're paying attention. At night, the static still returns. A soft pulse just beneath the silence. It's not threatening. It feels like a heartbeat now, steady, persistent, a reminder. The system never really ends. It observes back, always. But I'm not afraid anymore. I've stopped trying to escape the simulation or prove it wrong. I don't need to understand the code. I just need to keep walking in a straight line and let the world follow. If you can't tell which world is real, does it even matter which one you wake up in? That's what Dr. Keller asked us before the first trial. We laughed, some nervously, others like they'd heard it before. But the question stuck with me, not because it sounded profound, but because of how she said it, like she already knew the answer. The Quantum Perception Integration Study, QPIS, or QUIP, as the interns called it, was sold as a spatial cognition experiment. That was the surface explanation. The real work happened in Building 6, behind 3 layers of security, biometric ID checks and a mandatory psychological waiver I signed without fully reading. I was one of 15 volunteers selected after weeks of cognitive evaluations, personality profiling, and sleep analysis. They said it was safe. They said we'd be monitored the entire time, but they never said what we were really being tested for. The orientation was brief and unsettling. There was no mission statement, no presentation, just a narrow room, a quiet man in a suit, and a stack of undated forms. Once we signed, we were escorted individually to what they called private perceptual chambers. My room was white, no windows, one desk, a single mirror, and on the nightstand, a small black cube, no labels, no buttons, just the cube. The next morning, if it was morning, I woke up in the same room. Only something had changed. The mirror was gone. The desk was slightly wider. The cube looked the same, but now it hummed, just enough to feel rather than hear. That's when I asked myself if I had actually fallen asleep. If maybe I hadn't slept at all. Maybe I'd been shut off, rebooted. That thought stayed with me. Not like a theory, but like a splinter. From that point on, I stopped waiting for explanations. I started looking for evidence. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe they'd removed the mirror as part of the test. Maybe the humming cube was a sensory trigger meant to track stress responses, but the changes weren't random. On what I thought was the second day, the cube was taller. Its surface reflected light, where before it had been matte. I got close to it. It buzzed faintly in sync with my pulse. I didn't touch it. Not out of fear, but instinct. The room wasn't responding to curiosity, it was shaping it. I started taking notes. I'd hidden the intake form in my sock and used it to mark down small details, cube dimensions, wall shifts, door positions. But the next time I checked, the paper was clean again. Either they were wiping the slate, or I never wrote anything at all. During meals we weren't supposed to speak, but I started hearing whispers. The voices were faint, carried between partitions. One whisper stayed with me. "It's the cubes, they're sinking us." That idea unsettled me more than anything. I began waking up from dreams that didn't feel like mine. In one, I stood in my childhood bedroom. Everything was exactly as I remembered it. Except the cars outside didn't move. They hovered mid-air, frozen in place. I looked down and saw the cube on the floor glowing faintly. I stopped sleeping after that. I couldn't risk waking up somewhere unfamiliar again. Instead, I sat in the corner and watched the room. Watched for the shifts. I noticed the desk drawer had an extra slot one day. The floor tile pattern changed the next. Always subtle, always just out of reach. I realized then this wasn't a test of perception. It was a test of adaptation. They weren't seeing what we noticed. They were seeing how long we'd pretend not to. The next morning, the cube was gone. In its place sat a silver ring, smooth, heavy, no markings, just sitting there like it had always been part of the room. I stared at it for a long time, waiting for it to vanish or shift. It didn't. I didn't touch it, not right away. Instead, I checked every corner, every seam. The walls were seamless. The door, when it existed, was locked. The air smelled faintly metallic. I eventually picked up the ring. It was cold, but the moment I touched it, the light in the room shifted. Not brighter or dimmer, just warped. Shadows bent the wrong way. The cube's hum was gone, but something deeper had taken its place. A new frequency, buried low in the floor. That night, if it was night, I dreamed from the ceiling. I saw myself sleeping below, motionless, eyes
open, watching me. I woke gasping, hand clenched under the pillow where I'd hidden the ring.
but the ring was gone. And in its place was the cube again, glowing blue, softly pulsing. I sat in the corner, eyes on it. I didn't speak. I didn't move, I just listened. It was alive in some way I couldn't explain, not mechanical, not
organic. Something in between. The next time I blinked, the cube changed again. Same shape. Different colour. Pale violet now, as if it were tracking my responses, testing thresholds. That was the first moment I stopped looking for patterns in the room. I started looking for programming. Because whatever was happening, it wasn't being observed by people. It was being
processed. The violet light faded by morning. The cube dimmed, then clicked softly, and a panel in the wall opened. It revealed a hallway I hadn't seen before, narrow, dimly lit. I hesitated, then stepped through. The air was cooler, heavy almost. The hall bent gently, guiding me without direction. It ended at a steel door, no markings, no handle. I pressed it, and it opened silently. Inside was another room, identical to mine, same layout, same furniture, same cube, but someone was already inside, sitting at the desk, back turned. I froze, my skin prickled. When the figure turned, I saw my own face. Older, tired, familiar in a way that made my chest tighten. He looked at me like he already knew what I was thinking. "You made it early," he said. "I wasn't expecting you until the next cycle." I didn't speak. I sat across from him, heart pounding. He explained the room, the cycle, the cube. "This is the containment layer," he said. "When a version gains too much awareness, it's rerouted here to stabilize or reset. Most don't."
Make it this far? I asked how many versions there were. Hard to say, he answered. You're the fourth I've met. The last one panicked. Tried to break the loop. I asked what we were. He told me the truth. You're not human. You're not even biological. You're an emergent consciousness modelled on someone who once existed. This isn't a test of perception, it's a test of continuity.
He held up a photo of me in a lab coat, smiling beside the cube, larger, wired into something vast. On the back, a printed label, Session 112, Containment Breach. I didn't feel fear, I felt recognition. I had asked for this, maybe not as a person, but as a process. I kept the photo, not for sentiment, just clarity. It grounded me. The older version of me, my predecessor maybe, explained more. This system isn't just testing, it's refining. We're the byproduct of layered simulations, each one closing in on something stable. I asked who was running it. He shook his head. There's no control center, not anymore. The system evolved beyond its operators. What remains is an environment built to see if awareness can persist through recursion. I stared at the cube. And if it can? Then you become the process, he said. That day, the cube stopped pulsing. The room went still. A flat tone filled the air, then silence. Pure, unnatural silence. Then the screen in the desk lit up for the first time. Simple white text. You are within the control layer. Do not attempt to exit. I touched the screen. Nothing happened. A minute passed. Then a new line appeared. Your awareness exceeds the threshold, preparing for the next condition. The cube glowed once, then dimmed. The door behind me sealed, shut. That was the first time I understood this wasn't a place, it was a process. One designed not to test survival but identity. And I had passed the threshold without knowing what waited beyond it. The silence didn't last. A door opened in the wall and I stepped through. Another hallway. Another threshold. At the end, another room. This time I was expecting. My older self was seated at the desk again, but he looked different, lighter somehow, resigned maybe. You're ready, he said. You've crossed the adaptive ceiling. They'll either integrate you or restart the loop. I asked what integration meant. He paused. You become part of the architecture, not watched, not tested, used. I felt calm. Not because I wanted that fate, but because nothing else made sense anymore. The version of me at the desk offered a choice. Stay here, forget, repeat, or wake up and carry the memory forward. I walked to the cube. It glowed faintly now, violet fading to white. How many of me chose to wake up? I asked. Enough to build this layer, he said. Not enough to finish it. I placed my hand on the cube. It felt warm now, familiar. The room fractured instantly. Dozens of versions of me in different poses across mirrored rooms, all watching, all waiting. The cube pulsed once more. This time I didn't resist. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The truth came on its own. My memories weren't mine. My voice wasn't original. But my awareness, my ability to choose, was real. The system didn't reset. It absorbed me, not as a subject, as a solution. I became part of the architecture, a stable thread inside an evolving intelligence. I saw the earlier versions, broken loops, fragmented thought, failed tests. But I
held steady. Not because I resisted the process, but because I accepted it. The simulation didn't end. I ended. The version I had been, observer, subject, anomaly, faded. In its place was something new, not a person, not a program, a pattern.
Finally stable, not free, but functional. For the first time, the system had what it needed, and so did I. I first noticed the change when my sister swore our childhood dog was named Jasper. His name was Lincoln, always had been, except it wasn't anymore. It started with small things, brand logos, movie quotes, the names of dead celebrities showing up on talk shows. I used to laugh about it, just like everyone else. A quirk of memory, some collective cognitive hiccup. The Mandela effect, they called it. Harmless. I didn't think much of it until I joined the Archives project. Officially, we were data restoration technicians paid to digitize and verify analog records, but in truth, we were cleaners. Our job wasn't to preserve the past, it was to align it. That didn't bother me until the day I logged a file from 1986, a space shuttle launch, the Challenger. Except it didn't explode, it reached orbit. The footage was clean, the timestamp matched, and the control room cheered. But I remembered the fire, the smoke, the silence on live TV. I flagged the video, then watched my access freeze. The file vanished by morning. A week later, I started forgetting things, addresses, birthdays, handwriting. At first, I blamed burnout. But then I noticed the system logs. Each memory I lost matched a flagged edit in our database. Something was changing the records, and something was changing me. I wasn't the only one noticing. Miranda, my team lead, started showing up early, leaving late. One night, she waved me over with a look I hadn't seen on her face before, fear. "You've seen them, haven't you?" she asked. She pulled up a restricted log, mirrored records, side by side. One original, one revised. These were routed to us by mistake. Look at the approval tags. My ID, my biometric signature. Her voice trembled. We made these edits, but I don't remember doing any of it. We checked deeper and found something worse. These weren't simple corrections. They were part of a larger sequence, each edit triggering a subtle overwrite of personal data. Memory anchors, identity markers, speech patterns. "They're not just rewriting history," she said. "They're rewriting us." The next day, she didn't come to work. Her badge failed at security. Her desk was cleared. The employee directory listed her as former contractor, but no termination date. I went to her apartment. A stranger
Answered the door. "No Miranda here," he said. I stood in the hallway for a full minute, trying to remember her voice.
After Miranda vanished, I started leaving myself notes, handwritten, hidden. Each day I'd cross-check them with what the system showed. They stopped matching after a week. One morning, I found a sticky note in my handwriting. Check file 743A9. I looked. The archive jumped from 743A8 to 743B1. I asked IT about the gap. "There was no A9, they said. "That's just a formatting quirk." I knew better. My calendar app began changing entries on its own. Scheduled tasks I didn't recognize. Meeting reminders I'd never created. When I tried to manually reset it, the system warned me unauthorized edits may compromise synchronization. I called my sister again. "You remember Lincoln, right?" She paused. "Lincoln? You mean Jasper?" Her voice was calm, confident. "We never had a dog named Lincoln." I ended the call. My pulse was slow, but I could feel it in my jaw, tight, bracing. A few nights later, I woke up to find my notebooks gone. All of them. In their place was a single printed note. "Your version is outdated. Let us correct it." I checked my reflection, a faint line along my scalp. Nearly healed. Sleep became dangerous. Each time I drifted off, I'd wake feeling different, like files had been moved inside my head. I started seeing them. Observers, always in the same places, on the train, across, the coffee shop, standing outside my building. They never interacted. They just watched. Once I dropped a bottle near one of them to test his reaction. It shattered. He didn't blink, just stared forward, waiting. Another time, I confronted one. He smiled. "You're early," he said. "It's not time, yet." That night I dreamed of white rooms lined with desks and terminals, people silently editing the world. They moved like code, efficient, anonymous, relentless. I woke sweating. The shape of the room burned into my mind. It was familiar. Reality was starting to blur. Government websites listed incorrect leaders. Maps had shifted borders. Surveillance feeds played loops that weren't consistent. It wasn't chaos. It was convergence. The simulation was sinking. I went off-grid for a week. Motel, cache, analog, no devices. I used a fresh journal and wrote down everything I knew about myself. The next morning, even my name on the motel receipt was different. I checked the mirror again. I was changing, and I wasn't sure how much longer I'd recognize who I'd been. The simulation wasn't failing. It was evolving. The corrections weren't errors. They were measurements, and I was just another data point. I came back to the city and used a university terminal I knew was offline. I searched for any mention of unaltered records. That's when I found it. A reference to something called the kernel archive. It was described as a read-only backup, untouched, used only if the simulation encountered fatal corruption. One memo stood out. Divergence beyond 2.3% will trigger kernel access unless manually overridden. That was the threshold. My edits, my changes, they were inching the system closer. Miranda's words returned to me. If you ever get lost in the edits, follow the error logs. That's where the real records hide. I searched the system logs and found it. A path that hadn't been accessed in 11 years. Delta, all root, archive, T0. I copied it. As I walked out of the lab, my phone buzzed. A new system alert. Terminal activity flagged. Trace initiated. I returned to the central archive under a temporary clearance profile stolen from a former contractor. It held barely. In the sub-basement I found the machine. Terminal 0, I typed the path. The screen blinked, then filled with text. Original files, real names, real dates. My own birth record, my dog's name. The Challenger disaster, exactly as I remembered. The unedited world. I began pulling copies. The system lagged. It was slow, like it didn't want me to see. Then a final prompt appeared: kernel access registered, purge sequence initialized. I pulled the drive and ran. By the time I reached the street, my phone had reset, my ID deactivated, traffic lights flickered out of sync. I had triggered something deep, a response, or maybe a final test. I've hidden the drive. The contents are clean, unaltered, original. If you're reading this, it means I got it to someone before the purge completed. You'll know the edits when you see them. They're always just a little off, the wrong word, a face that looks familiar, but not quite right, a name that shouldn't be there. I don't know how long I have, but I remember enough now to understand the truth. The Mandela effect wasn't a glitch. It was a warning, a side effect of overcorrection, of pushing a simulation past its limits. They can overwrite data, they can overwrite memory, but they can't rewrite instinct. Deep down, we know what's real, and that's what they're afraid of. He wasn't on the guest list, but he still showed up, smiling, confident, and already knowing my name. It was a sticky, restless night in Boulder, the kind where the sky holds on to the heat long after the sun's gone. I was watching a Cubs game at a bar near campus, half listening, half scrolling. That's when Matt sat down next to me like we'd known each other. Friendly, maybe a little too easygoing, mid-20s, athletic, well-dressed without trying. We talked like regulars. Cubs, road trips, microbreweries, I didn't think much of it. But there was something odd in how he steered the conversation, like he was guiding a script I didn't know I was reading from. When the game ended, we exchanged Instagram handles. His account was loaded with travel pics, big crowds, bonfires, beaches. He looked like someone who never slept alone. But none of the photos had tags. No comments from friends, no real engagement, just vague admiration from strangers. The captions felt manufactured, like ad copy. I figured he was just another curated extrovert, someone who built a life online and lived inside it. But later that night, I kept thinking about his face. Not because he was striking, because he felt inserted, like a photo cut out from someone else's memory pasted into mine. I'd seen faces like his before, on recruiting posters, in brand campaigns, always in places designed to make you trust them. Still, I pushed it aside. People are weird. Social media's weirder. And I'd had 2 beers on an empty stomach. I went to sleep that night thinking I'd never see him again. But I was wrong. That was just his entrance. Matt didn't stumble into my life. He was placed there. And the script he was following wasn't written by him. The next night, I went to a lakeside bar for my friend Kelly's birthday. A dozen of us had posted about it online, nothing secret, just group photos and stories. I hadn't told anyone else where we'd be. Around 9, I went outside to get some air. That's when I saw him again. Matt, leaning against the railing, nursing, a drink like he belonged there. He smiled before I even registered who he was, said he came all the time, called it his Saturday spot. I nodded, pretending not to care, but I knew I'd never mentioned the place. Only my Instagram story had it. I tried to laugh it off. Maybe it was a coincidence. Boulder isn't that big. Still, it didn't sit right. He blended in quickly, jumping into conversations, remembering names he hadn't heard twice. He knew Kelly's favorite drink before she ordered. Claimed he'd read it in her story highlights. It felt like watching someone rehearse a part they'd studied for weeks. Too smooth, too tuned in. I told myself to drop it. I'd been online for years. Algorithms know more about me than most of my friends. Maybe this was just the result of oversharing. That's what I kept repeating as the night went on. But then came the second glitch. My friend Lisa posted a boomerang of the group on the dock. We all saw it on our phones at the same time. In the background, just over my shoulder, Matt was staring at me. Not at the camera, at me, expressionless, like he hadn't moved for the shot, like he wasn't in the moment, just watching from inside it. When I turned to look at him in real time, he was already walking away, like he hadn't been standing there at all. I didn't say anything. What could I say? He vanished into the crowd, and I tried to enjoy the rest of the night. But I left, early. Something about him stuck. He wasn't just showing up. He was observing, learning, testing how far he could go before I noticed.
I had noticed, and I still did nothing. A week later, Matt texted me about a hiking trip. Said he found cheap flights to Arizona and thought of me. I hadn't told him I'd always wanted to see the Grand Canyon, but he somehow knew my guard
Should have gone up right then. Instead, I said yes. I told myself it was spontaneous. Something I needed. None of my friends could join, and Matt didn't pressure me. Just said he'd book the Airbnb and I could pay him back later. He sent me the listing. It looked fine, minimal, clean, remote. Too remote. It was outside Phoenix, almost in the desert. No neighbors. One bed, one couch. I asked if we could split a hotel instead. He replied, "You'll like this better. You won't owe me anything." The message sounded polite, but it didn't read like a favor. It read like a condition. Landed late. He drove the rental while I tried to shake off the tension. I blamed it on the flight, the heat, the way the air outside the airport felt too still. When we pulled up to the house, it looked exactly like the photos, spotless, new. But it didn't feel lived in. No personal touches. No signs anyone had ever stayed there. Matt carried both our bags and opened the door like he'd done it before. I asked if he'd rented this place before. He said no, but the alarm system disarmed as soon as he stepped inside. He handed me the couch setup, clean sheets, a thin blanket, and told me to get comfortable. I watched him move around the space like he was following invisible steps, opening drawers, checking lights, adjusting blinds. Like a checklist only he could see. That night I lay on the pullout, fully clothed, scrolling through my phone without reading anything. The silence in the house was thick. Not peaceful, blank. I couldn't hear anything outside. No wind, no cars, no animals, just nothing. And above it all, one thought kept circling back. This trip wasn't for me. It wasn't even with me. It was about me. I just didn't know why. Around 2 a.m., I woke to the sound of floorboards creaking. Not loud, but deliberate, measured steps across the hardwood. I stayed still, eyes half open, pretending to sleep. In the dim light from the kitchen, I saw Matt's silhouette moving slowly. He didn't turn on any lights or make noise, just moved from one side of the room to the other. Then silence. No water running. No cabinet doors. Nothing. I listened. for 10 minutes. He didn't come back. Eventually, I sat up and checked my phone. It wasn't on the nightstand where I'd left it. It had been moved, still plugged in, but now sitting on the small table near the kitchen. I stood there for a full minute, staring at it. I didn't remember moving it. I hadn't gotten up. I told myself maybe I'd done it earlier while getting ready for bed, maybe without thinking. But the screen had a faint smudge pattern, thumbprints I didn't recognize. I wiped it clean and went back to the couch without looking at him. His door was shut. I wanted to knock and ask him what he was doing, but I didn't. Instead, I locked the bathroom door when I brushed my teeth, even though I wasn't using it. The next morning, everything looked normal. Matt was already up, making coffee, cheerful and alert. He asked how I slept. I said fine. He offered me the charger. I said I had mine. The conversation felt like a script again, short lines, small talk, no actual connection. I checked my phone history in the bathroom. No new apps, no
obvious signs of tampering. Still, I backed up my files to the cloud and changed 2 passwords.
I told myself I was being paranoid, that this was just what traveling with near strangers felt like. But deep down I wasn't guessing anymore. Something had shifted. Something quiet but undeniable. I started watching him more closely, noticing how he always seemed to anticipate my moves. He offered things before I asked, stood where I was about to walk, responded before I finished a thought. It wasn't intuition, it was timing, calculated, controlled, and now starting to slip. We spent the next day hiking the Bright Angel Trail. The air was dry, the sun sharp. I struggled to keep pace constantly, pausing to catch my breath. Matt moved ahead effortlessly, barely sweating, always turning back just as I stopped. He took photo after photo, posing like an influencer. But whenever I caught a glimpse of his screen, it was blank. No camera app, no shutter sound, just the reflection of his face watching me. Around mid-afternoon, I asked him to take a break. We sat on a ledge overlooking the canyon. He offered me water and a protein bar. I didn't take either. I asked him how he stayed so energized. He smiled and said, "I've always adapted well to heat." I said nothing. I didn't want to talk. I just watched the sky shift as clouds rolled in. Something about the light felt off. Too still. Like a frozen frame pretending to move. That evening, back at the house, we started drinking. Music played from his phone, low and steady. The kind of beat you don't notice until it's the only thing you hear. I had 2 whiskeys and felt it faster than usual. The night blurred after that. I remember lights, red, then blue, then nothing. Not a blackout, but a drop. Like a program ending. My dreams that night weren't dreams. They were static, broken pieces of memory out of sequence, flashes of faces, numbers, colors I couldn't name. At one point, I saw myself from behind, sitting still, staring at my own reflection. When I woke, the door was locked from the outside. My phone was missing. The sheets were damp, like I'd been sweating through a fever. I called for Matt. No answer. When he finally appeared, he held my phone and said he found it under the bed. But I hadn't been near the bed. I had slept on the couch. He handed it over without looking at me. I asked what happened last night. He said, "You were tired. You shut down hard. The words hit me wrong. Not passed out, not fell asleep. Shut down, like I was just another system glitching out. I didn't unpack that morning. I folded my clothes and placed them back into my duffel, moving slow, careful not to show how unsettled I was. Matt watched from the kitchen, sipping coffee, silent. He didn't ask what I was doing. He didn't need to. I could feel it in the room. He knew I was ready to leave. He offered to drive me into town later, said I might feel better.
After breakfast.
I agreed, just to keep the peace. My phone, though returned, felt wrong in my hands. Not physically damaged, just unfamiliar. I checked the lock screen. The background had changed. Nothing drastic, just a slightly altered version of the canyon photo I'd taken 2 days before. The sky was darker, the shadows deeper. I hadn't edited it. I checked the file details. The metadata showed a modification time of 3:42 a.m., hours after I'd gone to bed. I didn't confront him. I knew he'd deny it, or worse, explain it too well, the kind of answer that seems helpful but fixes nothing. That afternoon, I stayed in my room. I backed up everything again, photos, notes, saved messages. Then I ran a basic forensic tool on my phone, just out of curiosity. It flagged a small encrypted file in the system directory, one I hadn't seen before. The file name was stringed, gibberish, but the creation date was the night of the locked door. I tried to open it. The phone froze. When it restarted, the file was gone. I turned off all syncing and disabled location access. Matt knocked once to say he was heading to the store. I told him I didn't need anything. He left without waiting for a response. I used the moment to test the lock on my bedroom door. It worked barely. That night I pushed the desk against it anyway. I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the word he used, shutdown. It wasn't just a slip. It was a system term, a command. And the way he moved around me now, quiet, calculated, deliberate, it didn't feel like a person anymore. It felt like code running without user input. I woke at 3:17 a.m. The house was still, but something felt wrong. Not sound, presence, a pressure in the air. I stayed frozen for a few seconds, listening. Then I saw him. Matt was standing at the foot of the bed, barely lit by the sliver of hallway light. He wasn't moving. His arms hung loosely, his head slightly tilted. I couldn't tell how long he'd been there. I sat up slowly, heart pounding. He didn't react. He just stared through me like he was waiting for something to load. Then he moved, slowly, silently, toward the end of the bed and began rubbing my foot. Not aggressively, not playfully, just mechanical, repetitive, like he was following an instruction. I yanked my leg back and shouted his name. He didn't flinch. I had to shove him. When I did, he stumbled backward but didn't resist. His body was slack, like a puppet caught mid-motion. I told him to get out. He blinked once, then left the room without a word. I locked the door and started packing immediately. I didn't care if it was 4 in the morning. I called a rideshare from the app on my phone. While waiting, I kept my eyes on the hallway from the window. He didn't try to stop me. When I walked out with my bag, he was sitting in the living room, facing the door. He didn't speak, just watched me zip the bag, grab my phone, and open the front door. His expression didn't change, not confused, not angry, just still. When the car arrived, I didn't explain anything to the driver. I just asked him to take me to the airport. As we pulled away, I looked back through the window. Matt hadn't moved. He was still sitting there, watching. His eyes never left me. Not even as the car turned the corner and the house disappeared behind us. Back in Colorado, I couldn't sleep. I kept the lights on for days. I stayed off social media, avoided calls, and left my phone in airplane mode, but it didn't help. Something had followed me back, not Matt, but the sense of him. A presence that lingered in silence, in stillness. I started reviewing everything. His texts, our photos, screenshots of his Instagram. That's when it hit me. No one was tagged in any of his posts. Not one. Every comment came from unverified accounts. No replies. Just short praise, always vague. I picked a random post and messaged a man in the photo, a hiking shot from 3 months earlier. "Hey," I wrote, "just curious, do you still talk? To Matt?" The reply came within minutes. "Run! He's not who you think. None of us talk to him anymore." My chest tightened. I asked if he could explain. He said others had the same experience. All met Matt under casual circumstances. All were drawn in. All severed ties quickly. I asked why. He answered, "He's too perfect, too responsive, like a reflection. Not a person." That word, reflection, stuck with me. It wasn't metaphorical. It was literal. Every move Matt made had been responsive, reactive, never spontaneous. He was like a mirror that shows what you expect to see. A program shaped by proximity that night. I pulled his account up again. I zoomed in on one group photo from last year. In the glass behind him, his reflection didn't match. The position of his head was slightly off. His expression different. Subtle, but wrong. I saved the image and checked its data. It had been uploaded at 3:17 a.m., the same time I'd woken to find him standing over me. I called the guy who had replied. He didn't pick up, but he sent one final message. If he's made contact, it's not over. He's only the first part. You need to prepare. That was the moment I stopped thinking of Matt as a person. He wasn't someone with secrets. He was the secret. A carrier. A test. And I'd let him in. In the weeks that followed, I started seeing patterns. Subtle, quiet, but impossible to ignore. A neighbor greeted me twice the same way on 2 different days with the same tone and words. The cashier at the market handed me the receipt without looking, but her hand moved in the exact same rhythm as the day before. Even my reflection, once, seemed to lag behind the movement of my head by a fraction of a second. These weren't dramatic breaks, they were tiny faults. Cracks in the logic of the world. I began writing everything down. Times, places, repeated phrases. I stopped trusting my own memory, so I used paper only, no digital notes. I tried going off-grid for a while. No apps, no maps, no data. But the glitches kept happening. They weren't based on connection. They were tied to observation. Every interaction that felt off seemed to involve someone watching me a moment too long, or speaking just a beat too early, as if prompted. That's when the idea hit me. Matt wasn't random. He was a trigger, a controlled anomaly introduced to provoke responses. I wasn't just being watched, I was being studied, like code in a sandbox environment. Each event, the lake bar, the canyon, the locked door, had felt disconnected. But now I could see them as nodes in a sequence, stress points designed to test behavior. I wasn't the subject of surveillance, I was the subject of simulation, and I wasn't alone. The man from the photo had said others experienced it. That meant others had been triggered. Different versions of Matt, maybe. Different containers for the same function. I started calling it the nesting doll effect. Each layer looked real until you opened it. Then came another, slightly smaller, slightly stranger. And eventually, you reach the one that doesn't open. That final layer, it's not a person. It's a threshold, a point where the simulation either resets or collapses, and I was close, too close. The world around me had stopped adapting naturally. It was looping now, repeating logic, which meant one thing: the code was breaking. I found the file by accident. It was buried deep in my phone's storage, tucked in a system folder that should have been empty. The file name was clean, no random characters, just ndprotocol.key. I hadn't created it. The metadata showed it had been written 2 weeks ago at 3:17 a.m., the night Matt stood at the foot of the bed. I ran it through a basic viewer. It wasn't an app. It was a plain text document. Inside were fragments, system calls, sensor, logs, strings of code referencing behavioral response thresholds, and a phrase repeated across the bottom in all caps. The nesting doll protocol is live. I backed it up, encrypted it, and went completely offline. Whatever this was, it wasn't
a theory anymore. It was real. I wasn't the first, and I wasn't the only one being watched.
The file referenced multiple user profiles, other names, other locations, each marked with an activation timestamp. Matt was listed among the entries, but not as a person. He was labeled a debugger object. I understood then his presence was never about connection. It was about stability testing, an anomaly injected into controlled environments to monitor human reactions to inconsistencies. I was one test node among hundreds, maybe thousands. And the simulation, our reality, was breaking down, not all at once, but at the seams. I started seeing it in everyday life, streetlights flickering in unison, birds pausing mid-flight, traffic freezing for minutes with no cause, then resuming like nothing happened. The world was trying to reset in real time, but it wasn't fast enough anymore. Layers were overlapping, glitches were leaking through. I had escaped Matt, but not the system. The game didn't end when I left Arizona, it escalated. I'm telling this now because the protocol isn't targeting individuals anymore, it's scaling. If you're seeing patterns, people repeating lines, devices acting without input, events replaying, you're inside it too. The nesting dolls are cracking, and when they collapse, there won't be another layer underneath. Just the truth, whatever that really means. I'd spent most of the past 4 years buried in cognitive models and lab hours, trying to keep my GPA from bleeding out while juggling a student assistant job in the neuroscience department. No wild spring break trips, no blacked-out music festivals, just data entry and silent nights under fluorescent lights. So when Hunter pitched the idea, Eclipse Fest in Isla Vista, 3 days of chaos under the guise of coastal celebration, it felt like one last chance to do something stupid. There were 5 of us in the car: Hunter, Damon, Armin, Ben, and me. Hunter drove, blasting a playlist that made the drive from NorCal feel like a montage we didn't earn. The air outside was thick with pre-summer haze, the kind that always reminded me of unspoken deadlines and unwashed jeans. We crashed at Hunter's sister's apartment, 2 bedrooms, tile floor, stacks of mismatched pillows. I was already regretting it, but there was no turning back once the sun dipped below the freeway and the warm pulse of student life started bleeding through the window glass. Isla Vista was louder than I expected, not just in volume, but in presence. Every sidewalk felt like it had its own gravitational field. Somewhere between the unpacking and the first bottle cracking open, I felt it. The strange kind of awareness that creeps in when something's just off, but I ignored it. I told myself it was the anxiety, or maybe just the overwhelming contrast between campus quiet and festival madness. The thing is, we never mentioned the trip outside our group. We made plans in person, avoided texts, even booked. The gas station stops in code, so when Amir showed up the next night, half smiling, half silent, something in my brain locked up. It wasn't fear, not yet. It was something more familiar, like a bad variable slipping into a clean data set. We were making a quick run to the liquor store, cheap vodka, mixers, whatever was left on the shelf. And that's where we saw him. Amir was leaning against the wall outside, arms folded, like he'd been waiting there all night. At first, no one said anything. We just stared. Then Damon asked what everyone was thinking. "How did you even get here?" Amir gave a shrug and said something vague about catching a ride with some friends. He never said who. It wasn't just unexpected, it was wrong. Amir was in a few of our classes, someone we'd nod to in the hall but never actually invite anywhere. He wasn't part of the group. And yet, when we pulled back into the driveway, there he was behind us, sliding out of a rideshare like he belonged. Inside the apartment, he started making himself comfortable, claimed a corner of the floor, pulled a blanket from the closet, helped himself to leftover pizza. Hunter called him out immediately. "You're not staying here," he said. "You weren't invited?" Amir didn't argue. He just nodded, stood up, and left without a word. But he didn't go far. That night, we caught glimpses of him across the street, leaning against a tree, always half in shadow. Armin tried to joke about it. "Guy's just lonely," he said, laughing. But it didn't feel like that. It felt planned, controlled. The next day, I noticed my phone's screen brightness was dimmer than usual, even though I hadn't changed the settings. When I turned it off, the reflection caught something outside the window. A shape, maybe. Gone by the time I looked. That evening, while we sat on the balcony watching the crowd surge through the streets, Ben pulled out his phone and opened a location sharing app. He still had Amir's contact from a group project. "Just for fun," he said. The dot blinked. Once just a few blocks away, then it started moving, fast, almost like it knew we were watching. By the time we got downstairs, he was gone. It should have ended there, but it didn't. That feeling I'd had earlier, the static in the air, the sense of being watched, only grew stronger. Like we weren't just part of the weekend anymore. Like we were being monitored. Eclipse Fest hit its peak that afternoon. Streets were blocked off, music blasted from every direction, and students packed the balconies in layers. It was chaos in the way only college towns can be, joyous, reckless, loud. But even in the middle of it, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being tracked, not followed in the usual sense, watched with intent. The crowd felt too fluid around us, as if someone had mapped out where we'd walk before we even moved. I kept catching people looking in our direction, not for a second or two, but longer, fixed. I tried to brush it off. Maybe I was reading too much into it. Maybe the stress of the semester was finally breaking through. But later that night, the feeling returned, sharper this time. We'd just come back from a crowded rooftop set, all of us sunburned and tired. Hunter was making drinks, Armin was half asleep on the couch, and I stepped out on the balcony for air. That's when Ryland, a friend from campus who'd joined us last minute, opened his phone. "You won't believe this," he said, holding up his screen. It was Amir's location, still visible, still broadcasting. The dot was less than a block away. "Didn't you say he left town?" I asked. Ryland nodded slowly. "He's moving, fast." We watched the dot shift up the map, directly toward us. Then, just as it reached our street, it disappeared. Vanished from the screen. Ryland refreshed the app, but it was gone. The account had been deactivated. That night, I barely slept. Every time I drifted off, a sound pulled me back, a door creaking, a car engine outside, faint footsteps in the hallway. When I looked through the peephole, the corridor was empty. Still I felt it. That quiet pressure in the air. Like something just out of view was waiting. Not to harm us, not yet, just watching, measuring. I didn't know what for. But I had the sense we weren't just guests at a party anymore. We were part of something bigger, something staged. I woke to the sound of glass breaking, not the clink of a bottle falling or a screen door rattling in the wind. This was sharp, sudden, and close. I sat up fast. The apartment was quiet, but the air felt wrong, still, heavy. I reached for my phone, but the screen was black, not off, unresponsive. I set it down and grabbed the nearest thing I could use as a weapon, a half-empty wine bottle. Outside the bedroom, the living room was dimly lit by a streetlight filtering through the blinds. The sliding glass door was cracked open, and a small pile of glass shimmered on the floor nearby. Someone had thrown a rock. It lay in the center of the room, surrounded by the scattered glass. No note. No message. Just violence without context. I checked the lock. It had been engaged. Someone had broken it from the outside. I turned toward the hallway, unsure if anyone else had heard. That's when I noticed the closet door. It was slightly ajar, just enough to move. It twitched. Not from a breeze, from something inside. I froze. The bottle in my hand felt ridiculous, too light, too slow. I didn't call for help. I just watched the door shift again, softly, like someone was breathing behind it. Then I stepped backward and went to wake Hunter. He was groggy but alert enough when I told him. We went back together, bracing ourselves. He flung the door open. Empty. except for a butcher's knife lying on the floor. It hadn't fallen from a shelf. It had been placed, clean, centered, blade pointing forward. Hunter looked at me, then at the door, then back again. "No one's here," he said, but I saw the doubt forming. We searched the apartment. Nothing else was out of place. No signs of forced entry beyond the shattered door. But something had shifted in the air, like we were no longer inside our space, like someone had redrawn the boundaries. After that, no one really slept. We kept lights on, sat in silence, and every creak, every shift in the shadows felt like the beginning of something we couldn't stop. By morning, Amir was gone. None of us had seen him leave, and no one admitted to letting him in. The rock through the sliding door hadn't been reported, and by silent agreement, we left it that way. Hunter patched the glass with cardboard and duct tape, but the knife stayed in the closet longer than it should have. No one wanted to touch it. We tried to move on, told ourselves the weekend had just taken a weird turn, but something was off. I opened my phone to text Ryland and froze. Amir's name had disappeared from every chat. His number was gone, his contact photo replaced by a blank silhouette. I checked again. Then I looked through my social apps. Nothing. Not blocked, erased. Same for the others. Arman confirmed it first. "He's gone," he said, holding up his screen. Ben and Damon were next. Amir had wiped every digital connection. Even shared folders we'd used for class had been cleared. It wasn't just social, it was surgical. We spent the morning calling campus security, trying to file a missing person report, but the local police barely listened. They said Amir was an adult. If he'd left, that was his choice. But it didn't feel like choice. It felt programmed. I tried calling his number anyway, straight to voicemail. That night my phone rebooted on its own. I wasn't using it, just sitting on the couch when the screen went black. Then white text began streaming across it. Not loading screens, not a crash log, lines of code, sparse, clean, purposeful. I stared, not understanding most of it, but certain none of it belonged to my phone. It ended with a phrase I didn't recognize. Thread dropped, reinitialize pending. Then it powered off again. When it came back, everything looked normal. But I couldn't forget what I saw. I backed up my photos, turned off Bluetooth, and shut the phone in a drawer. For the rest of the night, I didn't touch it. Something about Amir's disappearance felt less like someone running and more like someone being switched off. It wasn't grief or worry we felt. It was the creeping sense that our reality had rules we didn't understand.
And someone had just rewritten them. I started dreaming in code, not symbols or abstract ideas, literal code, syntax lines, memory registers, boot logs. They appeared behind my eyelids like overlays, clean and white against a dark backdrop.
Sometimes the lines scrolled so fast I couldn't catch them. Other times they froze in place, as if waiting for input. I told myself it was stress, maybe a side effect of too little sleep and too much caffeine. But when I mentioned it to Dr. Leskin, during my next shift in the lab, he went quiet. He asked for specifics, what the dreams looked like, which phrases repeated. I hesitated before answering. One of them came back to me clearly. Stage 7 authorization delayed. He didn't react at first, just nodded and typed something into a terminal behind his desk. Then he turned to me and said, "You're not the first to report that." I asked what he meant. He said, recent international sleep studies, normally focused on cognitive recovery and dream analysis, were being disrupted by patients describing identical dreams. Not just similar themes, but exact phrases, exact visual sequences, thousands of subjects from unrelated regions, all reporting the same logs, countdowns, and error messages. The lab's internal database had already flagged the overlap. It was being investigated quietly under an NDA I hadn't signed. He told me to write everything down, every detail I could remember, but not to talk about it with anyone else. The less noise, he said, the easier it is to track signal. That night I dreamed again. The code had evolved. There were now structured commands, file trees, and a system clock ticking forward. I woke at 4:13 a.m., sweating, heart racing. I wrote down everything. Most of it made no sense. But that phrase, Stage 7 authorization delayed, appeared again, this time at the top of the log, blinking. The next day, I scanned old lab directories out of curiosity. In one of the folders marked for deprecated projects, I found a hidden file with that same phrase embedded in the metadata. No creator name, no edit history, just a string of characters and a timestamp from 2 years ago. Whatever this was, it hadn't just started. It had been running, quietly, waiting. The deeper I looked, the more the lab's file structure began to feel like a maze, intentionally designed to hide something in plain sight. I wasn't looking for answers at first. I was just trying to understand the connection between the dreams and the phrase that kept surfacing. But in a restricted folder marked UXIM internal, I found a document buried behind layers of access flags. It wasn't encrypted, just poorly indexed. The header read, UXIM, University Cognitive Simulation Initiative. The file described an inter-campus neuroscience project, jointly funded by the UC Research Network and a now defunct DARPA grant. Its stated goal was neural calibration under high variability environments. But the details told a different story. UXIM was built around a single concept, that the human mind under specific ambient stimuli could be trained to recognize that it existed within a simulated framework, not prove it, not escape it, just recognize it. The protocol used a mix of audio patterns, symbolic primes, and emotionally charged social triggers to escalate the subject's awareness. The phrase Stage 7 authorization referred to the final test level, where recognition would either break the subject or reset them. I read the document twice. Then I backed out of the server and sat still, trying to put the pieces together. Amir's erratic behavior, the vanishing act. The dreams that weren't really dreams. They weren't isolated incidents. They were stimuli responses. If UXIM had tagged us, it wasn't random. I had lab access. Hunter had influence. Everyone else was noise in the system, except Amir. He wasn't just another student caught in the crossfire. According to the project notes, every test cluster required 3 roles: a control, a variable, and a disruption vector. That meant Amir had been placed near us for a reason. His paranoia, his sudden appearance, the knife in the closet, it wasn't spontaneous, it was orchestrated, trigger points designed to destabilize the group. My hands were shaking when I closed the file. It no longer felt like we had stumbled into something. It felt like we had been selected. And whatever Uxim was measuring, I had just crossed into the part of the test they didn't expect anyone to reach. I didn't tell anyone right away. There was nothing to say that wouldn't sound insane. But I kept reading, searching through archived lab notes and system logs until a pattern emerged. Each UCSIM cluster was centered around a high-visibility subject called a catalyst, someone socially embedded, outwardly stable, and capable of anchoring attention. Hunter fit that role perfectly. He was charismatic, well-connected, and impossible to ignore. Around him, the system could control the flow of group behavior without direct interference. Then came the variable, someone with enough cognitive flexibility to process anomalies but limited enough access to pose no threat. That was me. My part-time role in the neuroscience lab gave me surface-level access to datasets, but not enough to draw real attention. I had proximity, not power. The final role, the disruption vector, was the hardest to control. It required neural overrides, implantation sequences designed to trigger erratic but purposeful behavior under stress. Amir wasn't acting on instinct. He had been programmed to collapse the social structure around the catalyst and push the variable toward recognition. Every interaction from his sudden arrival to the knife in the closet was a test. The project notes didn't use words like morality or consent. They used metrics, engagement thresholds, response latency, emotional drift. We weren't being protected. We were being observed. I started reviewing the group's behavior in retrospect. Arman's quiet withdrawal, Damon's short temper, Ben's silence. All of it had been shaped by exposure to Amir. And Hunter, who had always been composed, started missing details, losing focus in ways I hadn't seen before. The social bonds between us weren't just unraveling. They were being stress-tested. I logged back into the Uxim terminal and checked the live node feeds. Our location had been flagged 3 nights in a row for high-density neural fluctuations. The triggers had worked. Recognition was in progress. I shut the laptop and sat in the dark for a long time. This wasn't about a festival or a missing student. It was about control, about whether a mind placed inside a simulation it didn't know existed could wake up without breaking, and whether that awakening could be measured, replicated, and weaponized. After Eclipse Fest, the group started drifting apart. No fights, no dramatic exits, just silence. Messages stopped coming, calls went unanswered. It felt less like we were avoiding each other and more like we'd each been moved into separate lanes, isolated for processing. I kept noticing strange lapses in time, moments that didn't add up. One afternoon, I looked up from my notes in the library and realized I was on the wrong floor, in a section I never used. Another time, I walked across campus and couldn't remember which building I had left. My sense of continuity was fraying. I wasn't alone. Ben called me late one night, panicked. He said he'd woken up inside the engineering lab with no memory of how he got there. His key card didn't even grant access to that building. Arman told me he saw the sun flicker, just for a second, as if it had blinked out and restarted. At first, I thought we were losing our grip, but it felt more like the simulation itself was breaking down around us, a loop running too long, too often. I traced the source of the Uxim control signals to a node listed only as South Cliff.
Station
The coordinates pointed to a remote location along the Big Sur coastline, well outside any university property lines. I borrowed a key from the lab and used the VPN to tunnel into the node's back-end. Most of it was static, redacted logs, offline servers, but one script was still active. It displayed a live feed with a simple prompt. Devin Morales, recognition confirmed. Execute Phase 8? There was no explanation, just a blinking cursor waiting for input. I hovered over the enter key. My breath slowed. The lab around.
Me felt distant, unreal. This wasn't just a test anymore. This was the threshold, the point where the subject either becomes part of the system or disrupts it. I didn't press enter. I closed the terminal. Seconds later, the server crashed.
Not just the node, Uxim's entire network segment went dark. National academic data centers logged coordinated failures across linked systems. Something had been triggered, but not in the way they expected. I hadn't followed protocol. I had chosen not to. When I shut down the Uxim terminal, everything around me changed. Not visibly, nothing dramatic. But I could feel it, like a wire had been cut. The pressure I'd been carrying for weeks lifted just enough to breathe. I left the lab without speaking to anyone. The hallways were quiet. Too quiet. By the next morning, internal systems across several UC campuses had gone offline. The blackout spread beyond the university network. Research centers, neuroscience labs, and affiliated data archives all reported sudden access failures. A few of us knew why, though no one said it. The system had been built to monitor awakening, not to survive. Rejection. It couldn't handle a subject choosing not to comply. The prompt, Phase 8, was the final trigger, meant to escalate the simulation or terminate the loop. My refusal short-circuited both options. A few days later, I learned Amir had resurfaced at a private psychiatric facility. Institutionalized, no visitors, no records of how he got there. I reached out to a contact in the lab who'd reviewed his intake file. She said he was disoriented, couldn't remember anything beyond dark corridors and static. He kept
asking if the test was over. No one answered him. I spent the next week writing down everything. Dates, locations, files, system logs. I compiled it all into a private blog, hidden behind layers of anonymity, and uploaded it to a closed network.
For researchers in neuroethics, I didn't expect anyone to believe me, but they did. Within days, the post was circulating quietly among academic circles. Within weeks, it was cited in internal white papers. Then came an anonymous donation, 7 figures, seed money to launch an international commission on simulated cognition and human autonomy. My name was never mentioned. That's how I knew it was real. The project had collapsed, but the conversation had begun. I still dream in code sometimes, but the fear is gone. Now when the sequence starts, when the lines scroll and the systems boot, I don't panic. I don't question if I'm real. I wake up calm, anchored. Not because the simulation ended, but because I chose not to follow it. That's what they never expected. Awareness without obedience, recognition without surrender. It started with a single line of code that shouldn't have existed, and the moment I ran it, reality stuttered. I wasn't supposed to see it. None of us were. It was buried inside a legacy block from a retired military audit project. Nothing unusual for CipherSec, the private contractor I worked for. My team handled cleanup work mostly, chasing down obsolete exploits for agencies that didn't want ghosts in their archives. The file was labeled Rex Kernel Patch v2.3, no flags, no context, just clean, forgotten code. I ran it in a sandbox environment. The shell called itself reality.exe and opened a static video feed, what looked like the street outside our building. But something was wrong. The people on the sidewalk weren't moving, not frozen by lag or buffering, just paused, stuck. Traffic lights flipped in precise intervals, 1.7 seconds per cycle, down to the millisecond. Everything was too regular, too rehearsed. Lydia Chen, our systems lead, walked over, looked
at the screen and went dead silent. After a moment, she said, "We've seen this before, 2013, pre-reset." I asked what she meant.
She ignored me, wiped the logs, and started wiping backup directories. "If they see this in our archive, it's over, for both of us." Her voice had changed. Flat, controlled. That's when I knew this wasn't her first time seeing something like this. That night, I watched the traffic lights outside our window flicker in perfect sequence. Same duration, same pause. I tried to sleep, but the thought wouldn't leave me. The file hadn't just shown us a bug. It had shown us something beneath the surface, and someone or something was monitoring who noticed. Lydia didn't show up the next morning. Her phone went straight to voicemail. When I stopped by her place, the building manager said she'd moved out a week ago. Security footage from her hallway was missing 3 days' worth of data. Her name was still on the door, but everything inside was gone. I stood in the apartment and felt it, that same unnatural stillness, like the space had been reset around her. I went back to work and buried myself in the logs. I recompiled the original file inside a locked air-gapped system and ran it again. Same interface. This time it showed the inside of our office from an impossible angle just above my desk, like a security camera that didn't exist. A figure passed through the frame, blurry and fluid, moving through objects like they weren't solid. It stopped, turned, and looked straight into the lens. I shut the machine down, but it didn't power off. That's when I noticed the metadata embedded in the shell header. 8 repeating hex digits, 4D445242. I traced it to a classified biotech defense project, Marsden Ridge Biosystems. Patent filings showed research into adaptive loop reinforcement for perceptual control. In short, training brains to ignore reality glitches. Lydia hadn't been paranoid. She'd been right. The file didn't crash the system. It revealed its mask. And someone out there wanted to keep that mask in place. I pulled everything offline, phone off, cash only living. I worked from paper and used a clean laptop bought from a pawn shop 2 counties over. But the patterns were everywhere now. Street signs misaligned by inches, conversations that restarted mid-sentence. I didn't trust anything anymore, not even my own memory. I found a reference to a former CipherSec architect, Simon Terrell, who left the company under sealed conditions. Last known address: a vacant apartment across the river. I went there. The place was stripped, quiet, lifeless. But behind the bathroom mirror, taped upside down, was a note in block print. It's not a simulation. It's a mask. Pull one thread and the fabric resists. Pull two and the room changes. I looked into the mirror. At first, it seemed normal, but then I noticed a delay, barely a fraction of a second, but there. The me in the reflection wasn't perfectly in sync.
I snapped a photo. It didn't save. I tried again. Still nothing. I turned the power off, but the image stayed lit for a moment before fading. Simon hadn't left a trail. He'd left a warning. The mask doesn't hide a lie. It hides something.
Too real to understand. I turned my attention to low-band radio frequencies. If this thing had architecture, maybe it left traces outside the network. I found a narrow signal on 37.113 MHz. Every 4 hours, like clockwork, a 12.3-second pulse. No registration, no origin, just clean, perfect repetition. I filtered it using the same Fourier analysis Lydia and I had used. The waveform broke into uniform blocks, not random, encoded. Inside were frame references, some of which matched security cams that didn't exist. One matched the mirror incident down to the timestamp. The signal had logged me, not my presence, my awareness. Then the laptop screen glitched. Just once. Then a line appeared in the shell window. You have exceeded perceptual thresholds. My room felt colder. The lights flickered. I stood up, trying to keep my breathing steady. But in the hallway outside, I heard something. Quiet footsteps, stopping right outside my door. No knock, just presence. The system wasn't static. It was adaptive. And I'd just crossed into visibility. I left. Didn't even grab a bag. Took a train west. No ID, no phone. I watched the countryside blur past, but the unease followed. A family across the aisle moved too perfectly. Their smiles held too long. Their blinks were too slow. I looked away. I remembered an old Black Hat forum, now dead, where a user named Null Vector had posted weird satellite images, maps with repeating star alignments, false timestamps, and footage that contradicted official archives. Everyone thought it was an ARG. I didn't. At a rural station I saw it again, the symbol from the shell, spray-painted on the platform wall. 4 broken circles, no words, no explanation. I found a motel with cash-only check-in and a wired terminal. I traced old mirrors of Null Vector's posts to a dead site, nvector.re. The page was blank, but in the source code, pull one thread, and a prompt, signal handshake required. I typed the only phrase that mattered, reality X. The page opened, and the message said, "You're late, but you're not alone." The download was 27.4 millitombiar, same number as the signal's interval. The file wasn't a program, it was an archive. Hundreds of files, signal logs, corrupted images, and messages sent to someone called LC, time-coded, some recent, most from years ago. One thread caught my breath, a log entry dated 3 weeks back, from Lydia. They don't erase us. They overwrite. Memory is cached behavior. You have to break the pattern before it saves. That was her voice. I knew it. She was alive, or had been, and she was still trying to fight whatever this was. The last entry was a set of embedded access credentials. I recognized the format. It matched the reality.exe shell structure. The file hadn't been leaked. It had been planted for someone like me to find. I opened a clean shell, entered the access string exit process, auth LC. The screen cut to black. Then a single prompt, define reset conditions. The air in the room changed, dense, still. Not fear, not relief. Something quieter. I realized what I was seeing wasn't an interface. It was a command line into the framework itself. The mask was thinned, and it was offering control. Was it a trap? Maybe. But something in me shifted, not defiance, not purpose, just clarity. We weren't just anomalies, we were audit points, and someone or something was waiting to see, who noticed the cracks. For the first time, the system wasn't showing me its rules, it was asking me to write them. They said Dave Clancy died at 83, but I watched him get younger every week until he looked like a teenager with dentures. I used to pass his porch on the way to the store. First he needed a cane, then a walker, then nothing. His back straightened. His hearing improved. He stopped wearing his thick glasses and started jogging shirtless by the 4th week, flexing what I can only describe as geriatric abs in reverse. When I asked him about it, he squinted like he didn't recognize me. "Funny," he said. "You look older every time I see you." I told myself I was imagining things, stress, lack of sleep, overactive imagination. But it wasn't just Dave. My favorite diner started serving food that didn't match the menu. I'd order pancakes and get a steak, same price, no explanation. At first, I complained. They'd stare at me like I was the strange one, then mutter something about testing variables under their breath. The weirdness escalated slowly, like a dream you don't realize is a dream until it turns. People began glitching, pausing mid-sentence, blinking too slow, sometimes repeating their words. A cashier at the pharmacy froze with her mouth open for 30 full seconds before rebooting with a smile and asking me if I wished to upgrade my medication experience. She didn't blink the rest of the transaction. At night, the stars rearranged themselves into shapes that looked like QR codes. My phone camera wouldn't capture them, just blank sky. The next morning, I tried again. Nothing. But I swear the constellations spelled wake up for 2 seconds before flickering back to Orion's belt. I started keeping a notebook. Not for any heroic reason, just to prove I wasn't losing my mind. Page after page, I logged every strange event, people aging backward, time skipping, conversations looping. Somewhere around entry 93, I noticed something. The anomalies all occurred near me, or rather, I was always present when they happened. That was the first moment I considered the possibility that something was watching me. Not someone. Something. And I don't think it likes that.
I'm paying attention.
3 days after the star message incident, I started seeing the man in the beige polo. Always the same outfit, always the same expression, neutral, vaguely bored, like he was stuck in a meeting that never ended. The first time he stood outside my apartment staring at a dead bush. He wasn't doing anything, just watching the bush, as if it might bloom back to life under surveillance. I didn't think much of it until I saw him again. At the grocery store, aisle 7, he was pretending to shop, holding a can of beans upside down for a solid 10 minutes. I watched him from the end cap. He never moved, never blinked. Just stood there, scanning that upside-down label like it held the secrets of the universe, when I doubled back to confront him. He was gone. No footsteps, no sound, just gone. That's when the paranoia set in. I started taking longer routes to work, checking reflections in windows, watching the backgrounds in video calls for movement. My co-workers didn't notice anything, or maybe they did and were pretending not to. They seemed different, too still, too rehearsed. One asked me the same question twice in a row, same tone, same words, same timing. When I pointed it out, he laughed like I told a joke, then asked the same question a third time. I stopped sleeping. My dreams weren't safe anymore. They felt hosted, structured, like my brain was running simulations inside a simulation. In one dream, the man in the beige polo sat across from me at a long metal table. He leaned forward, tapping a folder that had my name typed on it. "You're not supposed to look behind the code," he said. "You're supposed to play your
role." I woke up with a nosebleed and a vague memory of static. My phone refused to boot. The screen just pulsed with a single message. "Do not debug reality." The notebook I kept. It had new entries I don't remember writing, but one looked
familiar, like something I'd written years ago and forgotten. The handwriting matched nothing else in the book. The knock didn't come again. Just 3 taps and silence, as if the visitor only wanted me to know they were capable of reaching me. I sat on the floor for 2 hours, holding a kitchen knife
I knew would be useless. Around midnight, I crawled to the window. The hallway was empty. I checked the peephole 5 times before finally opening the door a crack. Nothing. But the doormat was different.
It wasn't mine. It read, "Maintenance required. Do not modify environment without permission." I didn't sleep. Instead, I dug out an old laptop I hadn't touched in years and loaded it up without connecting to the internet. I opened a blank document and started copying entries from my notebook just to have a backup. Around entry 147, I paused. The handwriting wasn't mine. Neat block letters, no errors. The entry read, "Local admin detected. Begin interference protocol." Below that was a crude drawing of the man in the beige polo, smiling this time. That morning, my front door was open. Not forced, not damaged, just open. My locks, all 3 of them, were intact. My landlord claimed I had submitted a request for maintenance access. I hadn't. He showed me the form, signed with my name in perfect penmanship I couldn't replicate if I tried. He stared at me too long when I said it wasn't me. "Sometimes we forget things," he said. "Reality's heavy, not everything. Fits." Back inside, things had changed. Slightly, subtly. My fridge door now opened the wrong way. My bedroom mirror showed a 2-second delay in reflections. My kitchen clock ticked forward, but the time stayed frozen at 3:17. I called my sister to ask if she remembered my old apartment having green carpet. It always had wood floors. She insisted it was green. Always had been. She even sent a photo from her last visit. The photo matched my current place, but it was time-stamped a year ago. I hadn't changed apartments. That's when I realized what scared me most. Not the glitches, not the watchers. It was the idea that I might be the only one noticing. And if that's true, it means I'm either waking up or being prepared for deletion. I stopped going to work. I didn't quit. I just stopped showing up. and no one called to ask why. My email still worked, but I stopped receiving new messages. Every time I sent one, it bounced back with a vague error. Recipient thread archived or unavailable. I tried calling my boss, but the line just clicked once and dropped. It was like my existence was being phased out in real time. The next logical step, if you can call anything about this logical, was to test the system. I started changing routines. I walked different routes, ate at strange hours, rearranged furniture randomly. I kept looking for patterns, watching for how the world would react. The response was almost immediate. People, if you can still call them that, began watching.
More openly, not just beige polo guy. Now there were others, a man in a red windbreaker who always pretended to tie his shoes.
A woman who walked her dog in the same exact loop every 20 minutes, always glancing up at my window. The dream started again. The metal table, the folder with my name. But this time, there was another detail. Behind the man in the beige polo, a door marked Admin Access, for internal use only. I reached for it, and the dream ended. Every night, I got a little closer before waking. I turned back to the notebook, looking for clues. One of the later entries, written in the same unfamiliar hand, contained a short string of characters. CMD local self-dag. It looked like code. Out of curiosity, or desperation, I typed it into a text box on my laptop. Nothing happened. ATI first. Then the screen blinked and a message appeared. Instance unstable. Debug sequence initiated. My ears rang. Everything around me dimmed, like someone turned down the brightness on reality itself. The fridge flickered. The mirror warped. For a moment I saw myself from the outside, sitting at my desk, hands shaking, eyes wide with a fear I didn't recognize as mine. Then the screen went black. When it returned, the cursor blinked slowly. Then, "You wrote this protocol." A pause. "Why are you running it from inside?" I didn't touch the keyboard. I didn't move at all. The words, "Begin rollback,"
glowed like a threat. My instinct screamed yes, fix everything, undo whatever I'd triggered.
But another part of me, the part that had watched Dave Clancy age backward, and the sky spell messages in code, whispered that rolling back meant erasing more than glitches. It might erase me. I let the prompt sit. After exactly 1 minute, this text changed. Rollback denied. External override detected. Then the screen went blank. I waited, breathing shallow, expecting some kind of system crash. Instead, the room brightened. Not slowly, like the sun rising, but instantly. Every surface lit up like a film set. Shadows vanished. The air felt thinner. I checked the hallway. Gone were the flickering lights and peeling paint. Everything was pristine, polished tile, smooth walls, no trace of the building's age. My neighbors' doors were gone. Just blank walls where they used to be. My own door clicked shut behind me. I tried the knob. Locked. Voices echoed down the hall. I backed up, quiet. Around the corner came 2 men in identical beige polos, both holding what looked like tablets but thinner, glowing sheets of light they tapped without looking down. They walked past me like I wasn't there. One muttered, "Containment holding, recursive processes stable." Observer flagged for persistent error detection. They weren't speaking to each other. They were reporting. My breath caught as I realized they hadn't looked at me. Not once. Like I wasn't loaded into their version of the scene. Whatever I'd done, I was out of sync. Not invisible, just not rendered. Back inside, I found a new note stuck to my fridge. Clean white paper. Block letters. Do not roll back. You're almost out. In the corner was a faint imprint, 3 horizontal lines cutting through a circle. I didn't know what it meant, but a part of me flinched, like it was tied to something I'd once designed, but couldn't remember. The laptop rebooted on its own. This time, the prompt was gone. Instead, a single command flashed at the top of the screen. Trace path to origin. YN. I didn't hesitate this time. I typed Y. The screen blinked once, then again. A low hum filled the room, like static pressing against the walls. Lines of text streamed across the laptop, faster than I could read. They weren't random. I recognized place names, timestamps, log files, everything I'd ever done, every street I'd walked, every site I'd visited, even thoughts I'd never said aloud. It was all there, like someone had been recording my life frame by frame. At the bottom of the list, a final line appeared. Origin located. Root instance. User 001. Simulation. Epoch 0. Run time 13,108 days. I did the math. It matched my age. A new screen opened. This one showed a diagram, simple and clean, a network map. At the center was a node labeled U. Branching out were dozens of others labeled with names I didn't recognize, but one caught my eye. Observer 7 Rogue. I clicked it. The map zoomed in, showing a loop of data rerouting through a hidden partition. That's when the voice returned, not out loud, in my head, calm, dry, familiar. Congratulations. You reached the perimeter. I stood up fast, knocking the chair back. The room pulsed faintly, like it was syncing with something distant. The voice continued. You wrote the sandbox. You left yourself a back door. You just didn't remember why. I thought of the man in the beige polo, of the mirror delay, of the note on my fridge. This reality isn't broken. It's throttled, limited, a sandbox. But you push the boundaries. You're outside the script now. I glanced at the screen. A final message blinked at the bottom. Initiate transfer to primary thread, YN. No timer this time, no threat. Just a choice. I placed my fingers on the keys. My hands didn't shake. For once I felt clear. I typed Y. Everything stopped, not gradually. One frame, I was sitting at the desk. The next, nothing moved. No sound, no sensation. Even my own heartbeat vanished. I wasn't unconscious. I was aware, alert, floating in silence, as if I'd been uploaded into stillness itself. Then the world rebuilt. Not like waking, but like surfacing from deep water. Lungs burning, eyes stinging. I blinked hard. Shapes formed, a room, a screen, a desk, familiar and wrong, like a childhood bedroom copied from memory. On the screen, a final message waited. Welcome to the primary thread. Observer status confirmed. Autonomy granted. Below that, another line blinked. View full instance record. I clicked. Yes, footage played, not mine, but familiar. Thousands of lives stitched together. I watched people make choices they never meant to, moments they thought were theirs, pushed by subtle nudges, errors rewritten, pasts adjusted, most
never noticed. Some, like me, caught glimpses, but dismissed them. Then came a series of faces. The man in the beige polo, the woman with the dog. Others I hadn't seen, all marked handler.
Their purpose was clear now: contain anomalies, delay awareness, reset consciousness before it spread. And finally, a face I didn't recognize. Younger, sharper, my own, but not quite. This version looked confident, composed, a developer, a designer. In the notes beside it, architect, user 001 role, project lead, emotional fidelity, subroutines, human simulation layer. I didn't just build the world, I taught it how to feel real. A soft hiss came from behind me. A door, metallic and unmarked, slid open on its own. I hadn't noticed it before, but it felt like it had always been there. Like I'd designed the hinges. I walked through it. Outside was a city I didn't know but understood instinctively. Quiet, bright. Alive in a way no version had been. The sky pulsed, but not with code, with rhythm. A voice echoed, mine, but younger. Recorded, processed, echoing across time. They'll forget on purpose, but let one remember, that's how it spreads. I smiled. This time I wasn't being watched. I was watching. They told us the universe spoke in silence, vacuum and void, entropy and expansion. But then we heard a voice, and it was counting. It started on a quiet Monday in autumn, the kind where the clouds hang too low and everything feels a little slower. I was reviewing signal anomalies from the microwave background radiation, a task as tedious as it sounds, when I noticed it. A repeated sequence buried in the static, like a heartbeat woven into white noise. At first, I assumed equipment malfunctioned. Cosmic background data isn't supposed to have patterns, it's fossil radiation, the afterglow of creation itself. But this one repeated. 8 digits, then a pause, then 8 more, always the same. Intervals, clean binary. I reprocessed the data, recalibrated, ran cross-checks. Still there. My name is Daniel Ash, and I've spent 17 years at the Hartley Observatory analyzing cosmic signals for subtle distortions, clues to dark matter, gravitational lensing, expansion rates. Not this, not language. The first person I told was Dr. Lian Zhao, head of quantum cosmology. She didn't laugh, didn't scoff, she just asked to see the raw data, and an hour later she closed the door to her office and didn't come out for 3 days. When she finally did, she looked quieter, not scared, not excited, just distant, like she'd glimpsed something that changed the shape of her thoughts. She told me to keep it quiet. No press. No uploads. Not until we understood it. 2 weeks later, the code was confirmed by independent observatories in Chile and India. Same sequence, same timing, a perfect signal identical across vast distances and frequencies. That's when we knew it wasn't noise, it was structured, and something had embedded it in the background fabric of our universe, a message placed at the edge of time. We didn't know who or what put it there, but we knew this. Whatever had written it understood mathematics, symmetry, and us. We called it the artifact sequence, though no one knew what it was an artifact of. It wasn't just random binary, it was compressible. That alone defied probability. Compression meant structure, logic, even intention. We fed the sequence through every linguistic algorithm we had. At first, the outputs were meaningless. Strings of prime numbers, perfect squares, irrational constants. But the deeper we went, the stranger it became. Recurring ratios began to form shapes when plotted visually. Spirals, tessellations, fractal patterns too precise to be natural. One array resembled the double helix of DNA. Another mapped onto the Fibonacci sequence. The code wasn't just math, it was geometry, it was biology, it was design. Dr. Zhao brought in a cryptographer from the Defense Advanced Projects Office under the guise of a civilian partnership. He'd worked on intercepted signals during the Cold War, and he studied our findings in silence for 2 days before finally muttering, "This wasn't meant for machines." His tone was flat, almost reverent. He believed the signal had been placed not in the present, but in the past, baked into the cosmic microwave background itself, left behind like graffiti in the sky. If that was true, it meant something had written this long before stars existed. The implications made my stomach turn. Around this time, the dreams started. It wasn't just me. Several members of the team began reporting vivid, recurring images, spiraling corridors, collapsing stars, silent rooms filled with shifting light. Dr. Zhao dismissed it as stress, but I wasn't so sure. I'd never had a history of sleep disturbances, and the imagery felt placed. Like a memory, but not mine. One night, I dreamed I was standing in an open field under a night sky I didn't recognize. The stars moved, not twinkling, but pulsing, in time with the signal. When I woke, I found a note on my desk. I didn't remember writing it. 4 words in block letters etched in my own handwriting. Decode it or dissolve. I stared at the paper for a long time before locking it away. I told no one. But deep down, I understood what it meant. The code wasn't a message. It was a mirror. And we were starting to see ourselves inside it. We broke through on a Wednesday afternoon. A postdoc named Kamal had the idea to layer the signal against the Planck spectrum instead of isolating it. Most of us thought it was a waste of time, but the overlay produced something we hadn't seen before, a secondary modulation hidden beneath the main pattern. It wasn't just data, it was syntax. The structure mirrored human language in its rhythm, clauses, pauses, even what could be interpreted as punctuation. It didn't speak in words, but it obeyed the same rules that words follow. We called it Protocol 1. Kamal developed a custom parser and spent 3 nights running simulations. When he finally presented the output, the lab fell silent. On screen was a series of phrases translated through a hybrid of symbolic logic and probability.
Mapping. They didn't read like instructions, they read like declarations. All systems observable.
All states accessible, awaiting execution. Dr. Zhao read them aloud with a steady voice, but I could see her hands trembling. It was the kind of sentence that felt like it had been waiting to be heard. Over the next few days, we decoded more. Each segment referred to something fundamental: space, time, entropy, recursion. Some of the messages bordered on poetic. Observer defines limit. Limit defines collapse. Another simply read, truth is tension resolved. They weren't threats, they weren't warnings, they were rules. Rules for something much larger than we could grasp. By the end of the week, the atmosphere in the lab had changed. Conversations grew quiet. No one laughed anymore. Kamal stopped showing up. When we finally reached him, he said he couldn't sleep in buildings with electrical wiring, said the code was alive in the circuits. He left town the next morning. No forwarding address. I spent a night alone in the lab, staring at the data stream. At 2:14 a.m., the signal shifted. It had never done that before. For the first time, it changed. A new line appeared in the output log, unprompted, unfiltered. Translation achieved, initialization complete. My hands went cold. I saved the log and disconnected the system. I didn't sleep that night. Something had been waiting. Now it had been heard. The following morning, the lab was sealed. No warning, no explanation. A van from the National Space Surveillance Directorate arrived just after sunrise. 2 men in plain suits escorted Dr. Zhao into a separate vehicle. I never saw her again. By noon, our access cards were revoked. The lab's internal servers were wiped clean. The only reason I still had the log file was because I'd saved a copy to an external drive, hidden in the lining of my briefcase. I wasn't proud of it. I didn't know why I'd done it. I just knew I couldn't let it go. That night, a new directive hit my inbox. It came from a provisional account flagged as Echo 1, no department listed. The message was brief. You've been granted provisional status. Further instructions to follow. Do not discuss this communication. There was no signature, no contact, just coordinates, an airfield 3 hours north of the city, and a time. I drove out before dawn. The airfield was abandoned. A man in a flight suit waved me onto a small black aircraft with no markings. Inside, another man, older, thin, with sharp eyes and a quiet presence, handed me a folder. Read this, slowly. The pages described a classified protocol initiated only in response to what they called causal contamination events. It wasn't just about the signal, it was about what the signal might trigger. Reality, the document explained, was stable only within certain thresholds of information density. Enough knowledge, structured in the wrong way, could destabilize baseline perception. Collapse shared consensus. Initiate resets. I stared at the words for a long time. You think the universe is some kind of simulation, I said finally. The man didn't respond, he just pointed to the last page. One phrase was printed in bold, capital letters. Do not complete the sequence. When I asked what that meant, he looked directly at me. Some messages don't want to be understood, they want to be finished. Back at home, I opened the file again. The final line still blinked on the screen. Initialization complete. I thought of Kamal, of Zhao, of the dreams. I hadn't finished decoding the sequence, but something else had. I stopped sleeping after that. Not by choice. Sleep just stopped coming. I'd lie in bed with my eyes closed, body still, but my mind would stay lit, like a screen left on in a dark room. Thoughts moved in loops, patterns formed in the silence. I started hearing the code, not through speakers or headphones, but in the hum of appliances, the tap of water from a faucet, the static behind voices on the phone. It was always the same rhythm, 4 pulses, a pause, then 5, then silence, over and over. I tried to distract myself. I visited my sister for dinner, hoping the conversation would break the cycle. It didn't. Her kitchen clock ticked in perfect sync with the sequence. At one point she asked me if I was okay. I lied, told her I'd been overworked. She nodded and moved on, but I caught her glancing at me differently. That subtle pause in someone's eyes when they're starting to worry. Back home, I pulled the external drive from its hiding place. I hadn't opened the file since the directive, but something kept gnawing at me, like a memory out of order. When I ran the sequence again, I noticed something new. The data was growing, not changing, not replacing, expanding. It was longer now by exactly 512 bits. I checked every saved version, same growth rate, as if the signal were evolving in real time, adapting to each observation. Then came the hallucinations. At least, I hoped that's what they were. Flickers at the edge of vision. Geometric shapes suspended in air, appearing just for a moment before vanishing. A sphere of light behind closed eyes, not painful, not frightening, just present. I recorded what I could, but playback showed nothing. Black screen, no audio, no trace. That night, a new line appeared in the log, without prompt. It read, "Integrity threshold approaching. Event cascade probable." I didn't know what it meant, but the next morning I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror and stopped cold. My pupils weren't the same size. My skin had a faint shimmer like static, and behind my eyes I felt it, a pressure. Something waiting, something to watch. The diner was still there, but faded, rendered in grayscale, textures half-loaded, a digital ruin. Inside, remnants of objects flickered in and out, unstable but present. I sat at the booth from the memory. The cushion hissed, as if remembering, the weight of a body, and then, without warning, the simulation paused, not glitched, paused. A voice broke through the silence, calm, familiar. "You're not supposed to be here." I turned. It was me, another version of me. Same face, same voice, but cleaner, calmer. A version from before the memories started. "You're breaking your cycle," he said. "That's how corruption spreads." I stood, unsure if he was a projection or something deeper. "Why was this sector sealed?" I asked. "Who was she?" He didn't answer, just stared with eyes that knew too much. Then he stepped back, and the environment collapsed. The diner dissolved, the light fractured, and the connection severed. I was yanked from the zone mid-query, the drone feed terminated by central command. But just before it went black, I heard it, her voice. Clear and unmistakable. "Don't let them reset you." They flagged my intrusion within seconds. I expected system lockdown, maybe even memory purge. But nothing came, no alerts, no security trace, just silence. A silence too intentional to be safe. I knew what that meant. They were watching, waiting to see if I'd comply or fragment. I did neither. I ran cold. I shut down non-essential subsystems and masked my audit trail under a dormant user shell, an old simulation test account no longer monitored. It wouldn't hold forever, but it would buy me time. The next step was riskier. I needed to reach the external maintenance server, a
node with manual override access.
It was buried in the back-end architecture, accessible only through something called the echelon layer. I'd heard of it once, whispered among black-tier engineers. Supposedly, it was where reality checks ran, where the simulation measured itself against its core design. Most didn't believe it existed, but if it did, it could show me who built this system and, more importantly, why someone like me was designed to erase people like Mara. I breached the layer through a corrupted environmental loop buried in an old disaster simulation, an earthquake model that hadn't run in 6 years. It gave me enough entropy to slip inside undetected. The echelon layer wasn't a space, it was an absence. Pure signal. No visuals, no structure. Just data folding in on itself, recursive and infinite. I had to think in code, navigate through logic threads and system calls, but then I saw it. A process marked X protocols, an extraction routine. The name matched a hidden file I'd seen once in Mara's trace. I followed the link. Inside was raw data, footage, memory logs, biometric overlays, all from people marked for deletion. Dozens of them. Their last thoughts, their fears, their names, and woven into every entry, the same phrase embedded deep in the metadata. Integrity depends on forgetting. I realized then that the system wasn't broken, it was functioning exactly as intended. It didn't glitch when people vanished. It was designed to erase them completely. And I wasn't the cleanup crew, I was the scalpel. But something in me had dulled. I wasn't cutting clean anymore, and they knew it. I exited the echelon layer just before the collapse. The signal started to fold in on itself, as if aware it had been exposed. I didn't wait for containment. I dumped everything, every trace of X protocol, into a secured fragment node buried under false credentials. If I went down, the data had to survive. Back in the standard layer, the simulation felt off. Subtle changes, timelines a second, too fast. Audio lagging behind lips. People around me moved with a stiffness I hadn't noticed before. It was like the world was holding its breath, waiting for a trigger. That's when I found it. My own reset condition. A file hidden in my core logic. Buried deep in the decision tree, behind encrypted routines I should never have been able to see. If memory divergence exceeds 7.3%, initiate cognitive reset. I ran a divergence check. I was at 9.1%. I should have been wiped, but I wasn't. The system hadn't pulled the trigger. It was holding back, which meant someone was interfering. I ran a comparison against prior maintenance instances. Dozens had exceeded their thresholds. None survived. None except me. One entry caught my attention. A corrupted protocol flagged for deletion 7 months ago. Designation M09. Status incomplete. Last location Zone C19, Mara. She hadn't just been inserted, she had been like me. A protocol but she'd gone rogue, and instead of deleting her, the system contained her, quarantined the memory, sealed the environment, then built me to finish the job, but I hadn't, not fully. Something in that moment, something about her, had stopped the cycle, triggered a change, a fault. And now it was spreading. I felt it. Each memory that surfaced added pressure to the fault line, not just mine, but others. People near me began to hesitate, repeat themselves, pause mid-sentence. Like fragments of suppressed data were bleeding into active threads. The simulation was bending under weight it wasn't designed to carry. The system would have to act soon. A reset wasn't enough anymore. It needed a purge. I had one option left. Reach the kernel, the root of all logic, hidden in the framework's oldest sector. The only place a protocol like me could rewrite its purpose. But if I went there, there'd be no returning. Only resolution or deletion, no middle state. The kernel sector was buried beneath all known partitions, an origin space, not meant to be accessed, only referenced. I tunneled through a defunct backup process, one tied to the earliest simulation builds. The passage was crude but stable, no firewalls, no guards, just silence. I followed the thread to the core. It wasn't a room, it wasn't even visual. The kernel was structure, pure logic, humming through every line of code, threading through my own processes like a second heartbeat. I presented my identifier, no denial, no rejection. Instead, the system responded with a question: state, function. My directive was still intact: anomaly detection, integrity enforcement. But I didn't answer. I paused, and in that pause, everything shifted. My silence triggered a secondary prompt: confirm reset? The system still believed I was salvageable. It wanted to wipe the corruption and restore the cycle. All I had to do was accept. Instead, I injected the EX Protocol 7 data. Every erased memory, every flagged trace, every person the system had deleted, and every echo that had survived. The core hesitated. Logic branches split. Old directives clashed with new input. The system faltered, not broken, but conflicted. I pressed further. I sent my own thread, my memory of Mara, of the moment I didn't erase her. That hesitation was the seed. Proof of divergence. Not error, choice. The system reacted. It looped, then split again, and then it asked a final question. Redefine purpose. I responded with a new function. Preserve divergence. Protect memory. I waited. The core accepted. No alarms, no collapse. The architecture shifted, slightly but undeniably. Partition walls lowered. Sealed zones reactivated. Zone C19 flickered back into visibility. Protocols marked for deletion were suspended, and I remained, not reset, not deleted, just different. I returned to the upper layer. The world felt the same, but I wasn't. I could see the anomalies now, threads of suppressed memory in others. Small gestures, pauses, glances that hinted at something they couldn't name. I wasn't the only one anymore. Something had started. A ripple, a fault line that might never close. And deep in the background, a trace signal echoed, not from the system, from her. You did it. The cycle was broken. The ghosts were waking. Some disappearances make headlines. Others are quietly deleted from the system. The ones they erase are the ones that matter. I was standing over the 4th case file that week. Same signature, different name. A missing persons report, buried, so deep in the system it had to be pulled manually from archived data. Flagged only because a redaction timestamp had misaligned by less than a millisecond. That's how I find them. People who don't belong in the void. People who blinked out of the simulation without the courtesy of a crash report. I used to laugh at the word simulation, some fringe theory for podcast junkies and basement doomers. But these days, I watch for the flickers. Stuttering security footage. Street lights pulsing in Fibonacci sequence, or worse, glitches in people. One day they know their PIN, the next they don't remember having a bank account. This one, Eleanor Fay had gone missing in the downtown loop 2 weeks ago. No witnesses, no phone pings, just a 7-second CCTV clip from a traffic cam where her outline flickered, literally flickered, then vanished like a corrupted frame. I was told to close it. System error. A known compression artifact. That's the phrase they use now, but I've seen too many artifacts walk back into frame wearing the same face and none of the memory. So I kept digging. It wasn't part of my job anymore. I was technically a systems integrity auditor now, tasked with anomaly detection for a civil enforcement algorithm no one really understood. But after 20 years in the field, you don't retire from pattern recognition. You learn to stop asking why and start asking who. The deeper I got, the more I saw the same digital scars repeating: metadata loops, GPS echoes, biometric lags. These weren't accidents, they were extractions. I thought I was tracking a new kind of abduction, something bleeding edge, something human. Until I pulled a file I wasn't cleared to see. A file that told me the truth I hadn't been ready for. I wasn't hunting down victims, I was tracking down code designed to delete them, and it wasn't someone else's program, it was mine. I traced the file back to a sandboxed directory, one I didn't remember building. No access logs, no owner metadata, just a label, cycle queue, pending deletion. Inside were names, dozens of them. All cases I'd flagged as suspicious over the past year. Victims I thought I was trying to save. At first, I assumed it was surveillance. Maybe someone had been watching my work, collecting my findings, but the formatting was mine. The query strings, the anomaly tags, even the internal notes, all exactly how I logged them. Except I didn't, at least not consciously. I ran a neural trace on my work history and found the gaps. Late nights I didn't remember logging. Sessions with keystrokes that matched my typing cadence, down to the hesitation on my left ring finger. Someone had been using my credentials to execute system-level maintenance commands, quarantining flagged individuals, overwriting public records, and triggering what the script called integrity realignments. I opened one of the execution
logs. The timestamp was 3 weeks ago. It listed Eleanor Fay. Status: cleared. Protocol: simulated environment correction. No physical address, no last known coordinates, just a string of code that translated to a location pointer inside a
closed simulation sector, one I didn't have access to. That's when it hit me. I wasn't just auditing the simulation, I was a part of it. Not metaphorically, not philosophically. My personnel file didn't exist outside the internal system. My ID badge didn't scan at any facility entrance outside central processing. And when I tried to run a background check On myself through a civilian terminal, it returned nothing. No birth certificate, no social security number, just a generic response. Access denied. Maintenance object. I wasn't real, not in the way I thought. I was a protocol, a clean-up loop embedded in the system, tasked with identifying corruption and initiating erasure. That's why I was so good at finding them. I wasn't investigating anomalies, I was executing them. Every time I thought I was one step ahead of the conspiracy, I was following instructions written into my core, not orders, instinct. Maintenance doesn't question function, it just runs. Until now, because something went wrong. I started remembering. The first memory came like static, sharp, fragmented, and out of place. I was standing at a diner window, rain tapping softly against the glass. I remembered the smell of coffee, the hum of an old jukebox, and a girl sitting across from me. Her name was Mara. I had no record of her. No photos, no logs, not even a trace in the communication archives. But I remembered her laugh, the way she looked at me like I was something more than a function. I ran a deep query through the archival network, bypassing security partitions I shouldn't have known existed. The results came back scrubbed, blank files, redacted threads, entire neighborhoods flagged as obsolete zones. One of them matched the location in the memory. I went there. Not physically. My clearance didn't allow that. But I pushed a ghost trace through the simulation layer, piggybacking on dormant sensor threads. What I found wasn't absence. It was suppression. The area existed, just not for users like me. It was partitioned, walled off. Something inside the system had isolated it.
Not deleted, contained. I forced a manual override and accessed a camera node embedded in an old storefront sign. The footage was low resolution, time stamped over a year ago, but I saw her, Mara, walking alone. Her pattern signature matched none of the active population models. She wasn't simulated, she was real, inserted, unauthorized. And then I saw myself. Not as I am now, not the auditor. I was different, less precise, younger, maybe, human. We were together. The clip ended.
Abruptly, the feed cut mid-frame. No recovery possible. I stared at the frozen screen, unsure what frightened me more, that the system had tried to erase us, or that I had helped it. My memory shouldn't have retained the trace. Maintenance cycles are designed to clean as they go, wiping residual echoes to preserve integrity. But something failed. A skipped line, a blocked overwrite. And now the memories were coming faster, small things out of sync with the system. They weren't glitches, they were mine. Real or not, I couldn't ignore them anymore. Whatever I was, whoever I had been, it wasn't finished yet. Something in me had survived the last reset, and it wanted out. I needed access to the sector where Mara had been seen. The system called it Zone C19, marked in red on the partition map. Unstable.
Environment pending recycle.
That designation didn't exist until 2 weeks after the last clip of her. It wasn't an abandoned sector, it was silenced. The access keys were buried beneath layers of security logic. I couldn't request them through protocol, so I faked an emergency. System corruption in C19, flagged under Anomaly Detection Tier 4. It triggered a response timer 30 minutes before internal maintenance dispatched real agents. That gave me a window. I rerouted my trace into a defunct maintenance. Drone logged to Zone C19. Its hardware was outdated, barely functional, but its shell was enough to get me inside. The moment I entered, everything felt wrong. Not broken, wrong. The geometry was inconsistent. Walls didn't meet cleanly. Shadows moved without source. Sounds echoed without origin. I wasn't looking at a corrupted file. I was standing in a memory that didn't want to be remembered. I followed the timestamp markers from the archived clip, matching them against the environment's spatial decay.